Special meeting for the City Council on, when is it? It's May 3rd, 2023. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Madam Clerk, would you call the roll, please?
Yes, Councilmember Harmon, not yet present. Councilmember Friedman.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Alejandro Gutierrez.
Here.
Councilmember Jordan.
Here.
Mayor Rouse.
Here.
And I will come back to Councilmember Oscar Gutierrez
Present.
and Councilmember Sutton.
Here.
All righty, are there any public comments for the items listed on the agenda? Anyone in the chambers? Anyone online? Thank you very much. Close public comment, and we'll go to the public hearing. Chief and Ms. Peterson.
Okay. Good afternoon, Mayor, council members. So this afternoon, I'm going to present the police department's proposed budget for 24 and for 25. I know that I haven't really had an opportunity to give you an overall picture of the department and its organization, so I'm going to start with just some brief background, some statistical information before we jump into revenues, expenses, and the proposed reductions to the budget and what our goals are for next year. So I know this was hard to see, next slide, but it just gives you an overall highlight. I know you guys have the presentation, and even I need my glasses for this, so but it's difficult to put on one page, but it just highlights the divisions that we have and the overall structure. It doesn't get into what we would call the weeds in terms of the number in each positions, but it gives you the overall structure of the department. Next slide. So we'll first start with my staff, which also includes our community accountability, our public information officer, and our professional standards sergeant. One of the things that we talked about yesterday during the OIR audit as part of this is our public information officer has increased our social media presence over the last several months significantly. And he also is assisting with recruitment and community events and making sure that we're putting out, I don't know if you might have seen the post, but we're recruiting for a records manager, so we're also pushing that on social media and other positions to try to broaden our reach in terms of recruitment. And we, once again, have started some of our community events, and that's only possible through the work that we're doing with this position as the public information officer. So not just responding to the media, but being proactive with our messaging and trying to do at least some community events as we move forward. We have Field Operations and Communications Division. That starts with traffic, parking enforcement, the thing that no one wants to talk about, but everyone wants. Our community action team, our co-response team, our patrol teams, K9, SWAT, CNRT, and our special enforcement team are all field operations, as well as then we have our combined communication center, which does dispatch for police and for fire. We move into our investigations and strategic operations division, which includes our crimes against property, which is also where our crime lab and property room fall, crimes against persons, and then our special investigations unit, which used to be primarily narcotics. We have broadened their scope, and now they are narcotics, gangs, as well as what we call ICAC, which is Internet Crimes Against Children. They assist our detectives with surveillance and other specialized operations, so we have broadened the scope of what this unit does, which is why it's no longer referred to as narcotics, but it's now referred to as special investigations. And this is also when we have overdose deaths and fentanyl and those type of things, who handles those specialized investigations. Then we move into strategic operations, training and recruitment, officer wellness, training, recruitment, special events, deemed approved, our range and equipment, as well as our concealed carry permits, which we discussed yesterday a little bit with finance, where now, versus that being a county function, our department has to handle those requests. And we are required to issue those as warranted. So that's a whole new process for us. So you'll see that when you see the fees. There's now a fee recovery as part of that. Our internal operations includes our information technology, which, as you can imagine, requires a lot in the police department because it seems that everything we do now involves some sort of technology, whether it's body cams, it's not just your office space with your computer. A police officer's office is their patrol vehicle in large part, or their bicycle. So, our phones that can do so much more than they used to, the vehicles that now have the mobile data units and different things like that is all covered by our Information Technology Bureau. Our Records Bureau, so not only do they are the forward face when someone comes into the department to talk to someone, they also process all of our reports, our citations. They have a wide range of responsibilities for the department. Our business office, which we're very fortunate to have Lori in, but they handle all our purchasing, all the way down to the little things of payroll actions, to contracts, to our actual payroll, purchasing equipment. We also, the dance permits, massage permits, taxi cab permits are all out of the business office. I probably could list about at least 10 more things, booking trainings and those type of functions are also done out of the business office, reconciling payments, reconciling traffic citations. The list is really long. I couldn't even start to do it justice by trying to name everything because I'm sure I would probably at least leave out 10 things. But that gives you just a broad overview of everything that is completed by the business office. We have animal control. We currently have 3 animal control officers. You see that this is our most current new hire. So we are a full service department, and that does include our animal control. So now we're going to move into some statistical information. I will point out, and I'll try to differentiate as we go through, just the way in which we were able to capture it. Some of it is for fiscal year and some of it is for calendar year. So if I try to confuse you, it's not intentional. You just ask questions on that if it doesn't make sense. But we want to go through calls for service, some major data points, response times. I want to make sure that we provide a little information on the use of force and complaints, as we've already done for Fire and Police Commission for you at this time. So calls for service for fiscal year 2023. So that's from the start. So that's July 1st through May 1st. So it's not for the entire fiscal year because we're not through it yet. But this is currently, like I said, July 1st through May 1st. The total number of all police calls, you can see, is over 97,000. The number of calls that have been dispatched is over 41,000. I think those are the big highlights. Field activity. We have a graph that shows this a little better, but our priority 1 calls, our response time is still averages 5.5 minutes. You can see the number of Narcan deployments, number of reports, the number of minutes per, when you look at the bottom with the little clock, that's time per CFS, which is call for service. So to give you a little context with that, it averages 47 minutes. So that means how much time an officer actually spends on the call speaking to whoever made the report, dealing with the situation. Some clearly take longer, some clearly take less, but that's the average amount of time that an officer spends on a particular call for service. You'll see the focus area. I think that's another one to highlight. That means that if there's an area of the city that needs more directed patrol, needs more eyes on, we call those focus areas, and those are specifically where an officer goes and checks on those areas. So those are our focus areas. Like I said, I think this just gives you an overall picture of what all those calls for service look like and the number that we've had so far this fiscal year. Next slide, please. This I don't know that you've seen this slide before, but I wanted to give a little context. We often get asked about calls that we would consider more like nuisance calls, someone disturbing the peace, different things that we see when we have someone having, probably yelling on the corner of a particular street or those type of things, more what we call nuisance, not specifically related to an egregious crime or something that we already know is a crime. So general nuisance calls. And that gives you, a lot of times, as you can see, the majority, there's no action. It's a public assist, so we go evaluate and provide some sort of assistance. You can go down the column and see exactly kind of what we do. There's a lot of warnings. Not a lot of those result in an arrest. A lot of them are just public assistance. And when you look at the map, you can see a majority of those come from our downtown area. So I just wanted to provide this in context so you can kind of see where majority of the nuisance calls come from. A majority we do not result in arrest. They result in some sort of assistance or a warning. Or even if you look at, let me describe police jargon, you'll see GOA, that means gone on arrival. So someone calls in that something's occurring and we arrive on scene and they're actually no longer there. So like I said, I wanted to give you just a little context because we often get questions about those type of calls. So I wanted to give you a little more context on that. Next slide. And that one, just like I said, I was, not trying to confuse you, but you'll see the last one was calendar year. So that was for all of 2022. Here, now we're going to go back to fiscal year. So this, once again, is through May 1st, from July 1st. And one thing I do want to note on this slide, because it is very remarkable, despite our staffing challenges, is that we still close 64% of our cases within 90 days. So that's 64% of our criminal cases are closed within 90 days. That's a very, I can tell you, impressive number. Most agencies, strive for a clearance rate of, hopefully, within 6 months versus that's ours within 90 days. So that means we're very efficient about what we do, and our detectives and our patrol officers are doing very good police work. And you'll see, when you look at investigative division arrests, so that means those cases went to Detective Bureau, and as a result of their investigation, they made 118 arrests proactively on cases as a result of their follow-up investigations. You'll see we had 2 homicides, 32 rapes for so far in the fiscal year, robberies, aggravated assaults, residential burglaries, 94. I will tell you, incoming from LA County, that's a very low number in comparison to a lot of cities. So not that we can't do better, but that's actually an encouraging number. You'll see our evidence and property room is extremely busy. So almost 13,000 items booked into our evidence room in this period of time. And we work hard to try to return items to owners, and you'll see that we've returned items to the owner in 734 so far. Traffic collision reports, that's another one, is 1,096 so far this year. And the total number of reports with victims is almost 20,000 so far this year. So I think that's, just like I said, trying to provide you a snapshot of the type of crimes that we're investigating that are not the nuisance, and give you an overall picture of the really phenomenal work that officers and our non-sworn staff are actually doing. Next slide, please. I told you I'd kind of discuss the response time a little more. I think you'll have seen this graph before. The line is what our goal is. We've been meeting our goal and been under our goal. And that's a result of the mission strategies that was launched prior to me getting here, I think under Chief Malekian, and the alternative response model that was put into place. So we've been able to maintain appropriate response times despite challenging, just staffing challenges. The strategy that was employed before I got here has been very effective to try and maintain a high level of response, and you'll see that within this chart. So in priority 1, our target's 7 minutes, and it's 5.5 minutes. So that's a really good gauge of how well officers are doing and how well we're doing in terms of prioritizing and responding appropriately. Next slide. We talked about this briefly yesterday when we were talking about the OIR audit. So in 2022, and this is the whole calendar year, we had 147 out of over 45,000 contacts that any type of force was used. So in 99.67%, no force was used whatsoever. And just to give you a little more context, most of those were takedowns. We only had 6 uses of the taser for the entire year. We only have 2 canine bites for the entire year. But a majority were takedowns. Some were what we call the wrap, which is when we employ a device to prevent someone from hurting themselves further that secures them in an appropriate way. But we consider that a use of force because we're restraining them, and those are all documented, but most of those were takedowns. Next slide. Complaints, same thing. This is for calendar year 2022. We had a total of 25 complaints. 7 were administrative, and 18 were citizen-generated. So administrative is something that is internally generated by, whether it's a supervisor or another employee. Those were internally generated, and then we had complaints that were generated by a citizen. So those are the 2 separate categories. Once again, we had 7 administrative complaints and 18 citizen complaints. And like we talked about yesterday, those are very, the type of complaints are, for the most part, very low-level complaints. Next slide. And this is where I'm going to turn it over to Lori for the dollars and cents, so to speak.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. My name's Lori Peterson. I'm the business manager at the Police Department, and I will be presenting the fiscal year 2024 and 25 budget. I'll first be reviewing the department's revenues and then go into the expenses and also provide some additional staff recommendation changes that will need to be addressed. The first category is our general fund revenue. It's broken into 5 categories, with the majority coming in taxes, fees, and fines. And then we have service charges, other revenues, and internal charges. So taxes, fees, and fines, that is where parking violations are incorporated. We also have the half-cent public safety safety tax. In category 3, the service charges, these are for things like alarm fees, special events, DUI cost recovery, deemed approved, and animal licenses. And then under our other revenues, we have an agreement with the JPA for our local agencies. We do live scan, anti-auto theft, and the last area is the internal charges. And this actually is a transfer in of $220,000 from the traffic safety fund. So it's just how it's represented in our bookkeeping. So just wanted to point that one out. For fiscal year 24 and 25, we are recommending some fee changes. The first one is parking violations, increasing those by $5 per parking violation. So that's going to be an impact on our revenue. We are also recommending changes in our false alarm fees, appeal fees, reimbursement rates for staff to reflect the changes in staffing costs, taxi cab application fees, again, just to recover more of the staff cost for handling those applications and going through that process. Live scan fees and the concealed carry fees we're adding this year, as we haven't had that service before, as the chief mentioned. The department also receives revenue in other areas. We do get police supplemental law enforcement, which comes from the state, and that's approximately $200,000 and helps pay for an officer position. We receive funds from miscellaneous grants that we apply for. We only bring those to council when we receive them. We don't budget them in advance. So as those grants come in, they are brought to council for acceptance. And then we also have the Police Asset Forfeiture and Grants Fund, which is, again, the live scan revenues for doing fingerprinting and also an anti-auto theft grant that pays for the services of a portion of a police position. We also have a regional data sharing agreement with Ventura PD, and that's represented here at about $88,000 annually. On the expenditure side, the majority of our expenses are in salaries and benefits. And then just below that are the allocated costs that pay for services that we receive as a department that are provided by other city departments. Our supplies and services is the area in which we have the most say over where those expenses go. And in this category, that includes things like contracts, rental fees, our regular supplies and services for gloves and safety equipment is in that category. Under special projects, that incorporates things like our co-response teams, and that's activity, and you can see that there's just a fluctuation there from 2023 into 2024, just as that project's in 2023. And then we have some minimal capital outlay that's non-capital that is shown in the last category. As part of the budget process, we do have a few staff recommendations that we are presenting here. We've made some adjustments in how the street sweeping program is funded and our contribution to that, so that's reflected in the very first two lines on this chart. We need to remove the MDC allocation, which was an equipment allocation that we had, and that now will be handled through the Measure C process. And so that line item needs to be removed. And then on the bottom chart is the discussion about the equipment fund expenses going into the Measure C fund for $450,000. So those are the recommended changes and revenues and expenditures for the department for fiscal years 24 and 25.
So now we'll have the harder discussion, now that you have an overall picture of the department budget. The police department was provided direction that we needed to make significant cuts, almost $2.5 million between 24 and 25. As you can imagine, that's not an easy conversation. As we discussed yesterday about OIR, cutting training and recruitment is not an option for us at this point. We have to continue to train the officers and staff that are here. It was one of our OIR recommendations. We actually already cut an officer position in the prior fiscal year in order to fund training and recruitment. So cutting that portion of the budget is not an option. As you can see, when you look at, for 24, I think there's about $3.6 million that we have any control over. And like Ms. Peterson referred to, that most of that is already contractually obligated through the different services that we have. So it leaves us with very few options. We don't have programs to cut. There's already programs we're not doing because we don't have staffing, which is programs such as the Explorer program. So with that, we had to have some really hard internal conversations. We know that we need to be sustainable into the future and be part of Vision 2030 and figure out what that looks like. So I just want you to know these conversations and these cuts were really carefully thought about before we brought them to you. And we're really trying to look at and make the hard decisions that we need to make for the sustainability of not just our department, but for the city as we move into the future. We understand that, we're not exempt from that process. So with that, really, we feel that we've reached the maximum number of positions that we can put a hold on. So we are continuing to hold 3 officer positions for the 6 police techs. That was done part of last year's budget cycle. We're continuing to do that. We eliminate hours for our records hourly positions. We're proposing to eliminate the range master position. We are holding 1 specialty sergeant position. which would be probably our special enforcement sergeant position. We're holding 2 specialty officer positions, and we didn't completely identify those because it's really dependent upon needs. Our initial look at that will be probably one of our motor officers and one of our special enforcement team officers. And then in fiscal year '25, it's holding 2 additional specialty positions, whether those are our community liaisons, whether there's our specialty, our special enforcement team, or whether that's another motor position. We have to really figure that out. They can't be entry-level positions because the entry-level positions is where patrol is. So we can't go short in patrol. You know, that's the first 911 call, that's those first that have to be available. So we have to make tough decisions about how we respond and where we made those decisions. We also know that in looking forward and unless revenues increase for the city, we understand that these positions could ultimately be positions that we never get back. So that was also part of that discussion, is knowing that piece. You know, those holds we have to be prepared to move forward without, with the budget. So like I said, we feel we have reached the maximum number of sworn positions that we can hold. We chose not to recommend a elimination of like a records position or our parking enforcement because the parking enforcement, that's something that we all get complaints about. We're diligently trying to hire in that area. It's also brings revenue and pays for the position in one sense as well. You know, records, we're not going to decrease the number of reports that we're taking in and the workload in that area. So the range master position is an internal customer service position where it provides a service internally instead of externally to the public. We don't feel that we can cut any more services that affect the public. So that's an internal customer service position. And I want to make it clear that this is a position, this is not tied to, looking at this is all about what we can do with this position and how we can reallocate the work in that position within the organization itself. Now, is it going to be easy? Is there going to be some hardship with it? Yes. I can tell you the position has been eliminated before. It was eliminated, I think, back in 2010. And that position for elimination has been talked about for the last several years as part of budget cuts. I think ultimately it is going to happen at some point. We're making the recommendation to do the hard and rip the Band-Aid now and make that decision, because to be sustainable into 2030, with the tough decisions that have to be made, this is where we can cut that internal customer service. You know, a majority of other mid-sized agencies use a sworn cadre for their range. So there is a way and a strategy to do this internally. Like I said, it doesn't mean that there won't be some pains with that, but it is something that we can absorb internally. We have a position available, and part of this now comes to the person, for the person that sits in that range master position to be able to retain them within our organization. We want to retain him within the organization, and one of the fears is if we push this into 25, the position that we are hoping that to retain him in will no longer be available. So that is part of that consideration. So like I said, this was thoughtful in all ways, as much as we possibly could be. There's nothing easy about these, but we do feel that this is the way in which that we can meet what we've been asked to do in a way that still maintains public safety and still allows us to maintain our commitment to our personnel in terms of making sure that we are able to train, recruit, and fill the vacant positions outside of these that we have. Next slide, please. So I want to show you what the staffing looks like in terms of, and this is particularly only sworn functional strength. If these holds were made based on our current level of vacancies, would be the overall result. So with our number of officers, because we still have officers assigned to dispatch, although we are slowly getting down on that number. We're making very, very good progress actually in that area. Those that are injured, those are on modified duty. We currently have 5 in the academy. And then that 18%, as you see, those are vacant or held positions. So if these holds are what ultimately City Council decides to approve, that would leave us at 70% functional strength. So I just want to kind of provide that as this is what that looks like. I will tell you, we have a lot still to accomplish in terms of recruitment, which we've talked about, to fill the vacancies that we need to fill currently. But I do feel very good. I just got a recruitment update this morning about the direction that we're going and how we're moving forward with that. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute when we talk about our goals for next year. So, department accomplishments for fiscal year 2023. When I went back and looked at last year's, one of the main goals was to hire a permanent chief. So here I am. So we're going to list that as an accomplishment because that is one of the big things that was itemized on last year's to-do list. We have successfully completed the OIR audit, which you all received and got yesterday, which I think is a huge accomplishment. And with that, we've already gone through 19 of those recommendations and are working on the rest. We've made a big transition to the Fire and Police Commission oversight, which I think is another big accomplishment. What we're presenting to the commission every month is very meaningful. We're really working very hard with Ms. Anderson to make sure that and the commission to make sure we're providing relevant training and information to the Fire and Police Commission as well as the community. So I think that is a big accomplishment, and what we're doing together I think is a good thing. Next slide. So department priorities for fiscal year 24 and 25. The biggest one is recruitment within the local community. We're working really hard with City College. We're creating an internship program with them, which gives us an opportunity to, not just in sworn, but in professional staff positions, get those that are in the community and in college exposed to the department, and hopefully let them see what the different career options are and choices are. And, we're hoping that our culture, once we get them in, they never want to leave, and gives opportunities for them to grow. Sometimes someone can be young, and so we may hire them as a cadet, ultimately when they want to become a police officer. So it is when you use the baseball analogy, it's, you're bringing them up through the farm team and growing them until you get them to the major league. And you get to do that internally and have that contact with them. So we're doing different recruitment events. We're actually, for the first time in a long time, our next set of interviews are actually 2 full days of interview. I think we have 24 applicants that we'll be interviewing. I have to give all the kudos to our recruitment team. We've added to our recruitment team and our recruitment cadre because they've really been working diligently to come up with different strategies. And we're not done yet with those strategies. We're working really hand in hand with human resources to cut down on the amount of time and any impediments to getting folks hired. But the biggest portion of that is we're really focusing on our local community. You see us at the local community events and really engaged in this process. Same thing with our social media. Alignment of department resources. We've been, as part of this process with the budget, we're looking at our organizational chart, making sure that the right positions are in the right place in terms of our organizational chart, the right folks are doing those jobs, and really realigning the department to make sure that we are meeting the needs of 2023, As new to the department, I get to ask a lot of the questions, why do we do this? And so just understanding the why and making sure that we are sustainable to the future and that the decisions that we're making and the way we're structured organizationally will sustain us not just into 2030, but beyond that as well. Invest in employee personal and professional growth. That was also part of the OIR audit, was part of that training piece. So we are looking at specific leadership training, all the different ways for leadership growth and succession planning. I will tell you that my hope is that when I retire in several years from here, is that we have a solid succession plan in place and that you'll have not just one, but 2 or 3 to choose from internally to be the next chief. That would be my hope, that we're growing within and really providing that foundation in our department. So that's a super important piece for us. It was part of the OIR audit. And it's not just about the leadership training either. We're bringing some training in for our records bureau. That is specific to wellness and records and stress management, and looking at different opportunities for different training to really invest in our folks. To do wellness differently than we've ever done it. We have a robust wellness program, but that doesn't mean that we should stop with what we do now, and really looking to be innovative on how we take care of all of our folks within the department and how we help them get to the full length of their career emotionally, physically well. So there's a lot of room for growth in that area. Like I said, we have a really great start to it. We have more than what many agencies have in terms of wellness, but that doesn't mean that should stop there. And we have a lot of great ideas, a lot of people invested in this, so we're going to continue moving forward with that. Next slide, please. So we're going to talk about the 3 pillars outside of the fiscal sustainability, which clearly is a citywide focus. And we also then just discuss our piece of that. So let's move on to the core goals. Really, like I said, the police department is focusing on investing in our current and future personnel in all of these different ways. We want to support professional development. We want to increase our efficiency. We want to balance our workload, and ultimately providing improved public safety along with the robust recruitment strategy. So some of those, just in terms of innovation, we're going to want to do an annual test of incident response in a disaster response recovery scenario. And, IT and all the different things you hear are extremely important. We're always only one step away from, unfortunately, a computer hack, and that could come in so many different ways, as you know now. So making sure that we are prepared if something does happen, what that disaster recovery looks like. The second one, I'm going to give it to you in a much less complicated term than we used in terms of this. Basically, we want to make sure that there are external reporting features that will make us more transparent using the software that we have. So that instead of waiting for us to present facts, people will be able to just go to our website and get information. Kind of similar to how OpenGov does with the budget, but using our internal tools. So we're working on doing it internally right now, but our hope is next year we'll be able to provide that same to the public. Once again, the recruitment plan embraces our local community groups, colleges, universities. We want to be desirable of a place to work. Our percentage of vacancies overall is extremely high right now between professional staff and sworn. Our goal is to get that less than 15% next year. And then the goal after that will be get to even less. But we have to, I think, set a reasonable workload for ourselves, and hopefully we can exceed that, but that's our goal, is less than 15% in terms of vacancies. We want to move to our field operations to an 11-hour plan. Before I got here, Chief Malekian started a internal group this was driven internally to look at different schedules that would improve the quality, not just of service to the community in terms of patrol scheduling, but also taking into account people's commute, overlapping shifts, getting rid of the mandatory overtime that we do, And this internal committee came up with this 11-hour plan. A couple other agencies already use it. Roseville and Santa Clara use it. So our goal and our hope is that in July, we'll be able to launch this and try something different. Like I said, it was very internally driven, and so the goal is to actually move that plan into action next fiscal year. This actually came as a result of our Police Officers Association. They really want to see us do annual mental health check-ins to improve the well-being of employees. So that is something that is we're looking at for next fiscal year and how we can accomplish that. Once again, employee-driven. And then the last one is having sergeants and commanders attend use of force investigation training. So as part of the OIR audit and as we move forward into the future, we want to make sure all of our supervisors have attended and managers have attended use of force investigation training as well next year. So that kind of gives you a overview of just the big checkoff goals. Clearly, there's a lot of other ones, but this is our main priorities as we move into next year.
Thank you, Chief. Questions for the Chief? Mr. Friedman.
Thank you, Chief. There's a lot of information here. If you could just pull up slide 23. I think that's an important slide to try to understand. And this goes into the reductions for this year and next year. Could you, just for reference for us as a reminder, and then the public, there's that 142 number that we have in the Department of Police Staff. What is that number, and how does it relate to the number of patrol officers and sworn officers that we have?
So 142 is our total, quote, allotment, right, for sworn officers. That does not include our professional staff. Our total number of full-time equivalents with professional staff and sworn is 210. So 142 is our number. If we could hire everyone that we needed to hire today in terms of sworn, that would be 142 minus the positions that we're holding. And those positions that we're holding then include the 3 positions for the police technicians that were already held prior, and then the new sergeant and 4 other officer positions that we're holding.
So that would put us at how many right now that we're?
So that puts us at, we just did the math yesterday, again, to make sure. But, so the 3 plus the 5 positions that we're holding, so that's 8 positions, so that would be 134, right? So that's 134 is what we would be authorized to hire for.
And then that's what these are, so it would bring us to 134, and you mentioned that this is temporary, but there might be, as we go forward, these could become permanent, is that?
That would be a city council decision based on budgeting and resources. So that's, we know that could be, but I said that's ultimately a decision outside of us. We just know and understand the overall big picture, and that would be completely a council decision.
Mayor House, Councilmember Friedman, when I gave directions to my staff about reductions, because we were looking at a deficit even in a very well-funded time, it's clear that we need to make long-term changes to the work that we're doing, either through finding additional revenues, which we currently don't have the ability to do, or through reductions in expenditures. So we have been trying to shift down to a more lean organization, and also trying to find places to eliminate the work associated with any reductions of staff. It's a challenge, quite frankly, but because of the need for public safety, the directions to the chief were, let's hold these open and see if we can't come up, if the community won't support some additional revenue before we have to make long-term decisions on these positions.
So these are being held right now with the strategic goal of trying to find additional revenues, but short of that, these could come back later as permanent, or a recommendation, and the council would have to do that in a year or 2 from now, make that decision.
That's correct, or find other ways to offset the expenditure cuts that we'd need.
And then in terms of the recruitment and retention, So do we have an estimate? We've seen it before up here, but I can't recall how many, what percentage, I should say, of our sworn officers live outside the South Coast? Do we have an approximate number, or that live here?
I couldn't give you that number off the top of my head. We have a lot of officers that live outside, whether they live north up in the valley or they live down south in Ventura. I have an officer that commutes an hour and a half away right now. I think that's one of my longest, and that's, I will tell you, without traffic, it's an hour and a half commute, if not longer. So we have them quite spread out. I think, and I can ask, I'd say maybe 30% live, between Goleta and Carpinteria, but I think that would be a guess.
That's about what I remember, but I was wondering if it's out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember it being somewhere, but and I apologize for not. I just thought of the question now. And the reason I get to this is because we have these challenges, but when we're talking about recruitment and retention, due to the high cost of housing and the commutes, these could be exacerbated because then we have to look at the compensation that we're able to have versus the other jurisdictions. So, how are we? When we're looking at these budgetary issues, but in terms of other incentives, looking at how we can incentivize or get more officers to live on the South Coast, whereas if they're commuting an hour and a half and they're bypassing multiple jurisdictions, the incentive is to go to another agency. So what other things in addition to salary are we looking at?
Well, we actually were having this conversation with HR this morning. There's a lot of different things that we have to sit down and look at. I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all. We're, trying to use different things and, without shame whatsoever, look at what others working for other agencies that are being successful. There's a agency down south that very successfully uses a incentive of their employees when they recommend someone that then becomes an officer and then makes it through the academy. We have such a process already in place, so we are now making that an easier process, and we're going to make that highlighted within our recruitment strategy. We are talking about, we have to look at, because a lot of it costs money, right? Whether we did tuition reimbursement, whether we agreed to pay off a certain percentage of student loans, whether we, I think there's different things. LAPD pays a percentage of housing for the first period of time for their officers. So I think we just have to be really intentional about what we do and how we do it. Ultimately, most of the things cost money. We can only make our culture will get us only to a certain extent. Culture is a big piece of it, which is what, people enjoy being at work, and so people will drive, 15 minutes further. So that's an important piece of it. But, the reality of it is, I said it yesterday, housing is a struggle here. And which is why we're looking to really try to capitalize locally as part of our recruitment strategy, because we're trying to take that piece out of the mix. We have 2 officers leaving to go to Santa Maria this month. They get a $30,000 recruitment bonus for going. They already both live in that area. They no longer have a commute, but they are not new officers. They're more senior officers, but it's just gotten to a point where it's too much for them. And now there's an opportunity not to have that for their family. So I do think compensation is certainly a piece that we're going to have to talk about more than once. I think we're going to have to look at different recruitment incentives that are way outside the box. And I can't tell you exactly what all those are, because that is part of our strategy for next year, is to really figure out how we can do that. We know we need to do it, but those are just some of the things that, like I said, we're trying to take from other agencies that have been very successful in our other areas and really think outside the box. I mean, we're doing a family night prior to them going into the academy, where we bring all their families in and they get to meet each other and they get to meet all of us, so that we're creating a support system before they go in the academy. That's part of the culture and part of those intangible things that go a long way. When it comes to a physical agility test, myself and they're usually on Fridays, so it's usually myself and Assistant Chief Kushner, and we're trying to provide positive encouragement, because a lot of them are applying to different agencies at the same time. So how can we make ourselves stand out? How do we want to make sure someone comes back to us? So we, that personal touch of actually seeing the chief at that moment, watching an assistant chief do push-ups with them, those little things go so far. So it's those little pieces too that also make a big difference. So like I said, nothing's off the table. We're looking at all different strategies that we can do. We're working with City College to really try to tap into that. We're now doing a workshop prior to the application process to help them be more successful. And that we're already seeing that piece very helpful, almost like an orientation prior to them ever getting in the process, so they can get their questions answered. So everything that we can do, we're going to do. We know that we've only scratched the surface, but we are going to have more hard conversations because compensation is a big deal, and you have the Santa Barbara factor. So compensation, like I said, other things that we can do and really think outside the box.
So in terms of I appreciate that answer, that we are looking strategically at all the issues. There's not just one or two or three, there's multiple, to getting new recruits and then keeping those right here. So with these 2.5 million that are reductions shown in this slide, if we wanted to get back to there, aside from new revenue, we'd actually have to, one, look at compensation, look at some of these other factors that might not be direct compensation, but will have costs. So to get back to where these are, it would, as I am understanding it, there would be additional costs. So it might take more than 2.5 million to get back to where this is. Am I understanding that correctly?
I think realistically, yes.
So just like a couple more questions that kind of get into where this. So with the new police station, when it comes online in hopefully a few years, how would that affect the recruitment and retention?
I think it's going to be a big piece of it. Our hope is very shortly, I know that the team has been working on getting to a place where we can actually incorporate part of the footage. We're going to do a new recruitment video and being able to incorporate that, have new renderings, because there's a lot of really exciting things within the department and the new station that I think will be really big recruitment pieces. We're putting dispatch on the 3rd floor and not hiding them in a basement, and actually giving them the prime real estate and with the view that they're going to get, and having an open patio, having appropriate workout facilities, having an outside patio for officers to be able to step out and non-sworn step out and take a break. We're looking at a non-traditional locker room facility that gets away from men's and women's locker room, and instead having changing rooms in one area where everyone has a locker that stores their things, but that is not where you change. Making it that more inclusive department in terms of the actual facility, having everyone under one roof so that it makes that teamwork easier, having the appropriate community room within it, having the appropriate training room within it, having the appropriate technology within it. So all those pieces, absolutely. And the initial renderings and what we're seeing, we're really excited about, and going through this process. I think that the sooner, we get to a point where we can start sharing that, yes, I think it's going to be a big recruitment piece, and keeping to that timeline and continuing to move forward with that is going to be very big for us.
And then, well, that's great, and we're getting to a point, hopefully we can start using
I
that
can't
more
wait
of
to
a
turn a
tool.
shovel, so that's all I got to say.
Yeah, you and me both. And then, and with this police station also, could you speak to the savings that we would have from right now? We rent different places. We have, is there a cost savings that will come with getting everything under one roof?
I think ultimately in the future there will be. I mean, I think, as it looks now, it has to be a sustainable facility, which comes with an initial cost on the front end, but hopefully that will save costs on the back end. I think ultimately, the amount of money that we spend in maintenance for this building that we have now and the annex, and, having dispatch in a separate place, and all of the challenges with that, I think ultimately, yes. I think we'll get to a place where the cost is less, yearly, but as I say that, inflation will go up, so then, there's that factor. But I think ultimately, in terms of all the different challenges, that will lower our costs as we go.
Great. And then my last question for now, unless others come up, is could you speak to a little more detail about the 11-hour plan in terms of that overtime? Does it allow for more days off?
It
for
doesn't allow
commuters?
for more days off, but what it allows is for 3 shifts per day. So it allows from a day watch shift, a mid shift, and a evening shift, night shift. So it allows officers to have more choice in terms of what works for their family. It also allows for, during our busiest hours, when you look at the hours that we work in patrol, it then creates what we call an overlap. So there's actually more officers on the street when we're during our busiest times. It also allows for, with the overlap, someone that's supposed to get off, I'm going to pick a random hour at 4 o'clock, now doesn't take a call at 3:45. The other shift that is now here still for another 6 hours picks up those calls. So it helps us get officers off on time. So those are all big pieces of the quality of life issues, and as well as for public safety, because now we're providing more officers in the public during our busiest hours. So there's not just a internal benefit, but there's an external customer service benefit. And like I said, right now, part of our teams work a 10-hour shift and part work a 12-and-a-half-hour shift. Each side of the week works something different. So we have some range for officers to pick from, but this overall, with the way the scheduling and way, it gives a training day every 6 weeks. That will be a built-in training day. So there's some other positives to this that we don't currently have. And, you know, the best thing about it is if we try it and it doesn't work, we have something that we know works and we just go back. But if we don't try, that's our failure, is not trying.
Thank you. That's very helpful. I appreciate the clarification that, one, it'll hopefully, the goal is that it'll increase public service availability, but also provide more options for officers. So thank you, and appreciate your time.
Mr. Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Chief, for the presentation. I have questions on that same slide, too. So are you making a choice that, on the top bullet there, that the 6 police technicians at this point in time are more needed than the 3 patrol officers, and that's your preference?
Yes, our police technicians do a great deal of administrative work, and I know this was brought under Chief Malekian last year, and I think it has paid dividends to have these technicians. They do everything from, they help out a lot in detectives with our electronic discovery requests from the DA's office and other areas. So, yeah, they're extremely helpful because otherwise a police officer would have to do these functions.
Okay. And then the specialty sergeant positions, both 24 and 25, I may ask you that. In fact, let me just ask you that. I'd love to hear if you could just send me for the future discussions on what the dollar amount is for the 1 and the 2, the 2 bullets in fiscal year 24 for the specialty sergeant positions, and then also what you're anticipating that would be in fiscal year 225. I'm assuming that 986 is that whole group, and then I'm assuming the 1.5 is a cumulative over
Correct.
multiple years, right?
Yes.
But I'd be interested in hearing, like, if somebody wanted to make the case that those are needed positions, well, what's the dollar hit on those? If you could just follow up.
We can certainly follow up. I know,
And then-
I know
okay.
Ms. Peterson has them broken out by position. I just don't have them in
And
front of me.
then, same question too, for those specialty sergeant, specialty officer, or specialty officer positions in the following year. If you had the druthers, you want those or patrol officers?
Well, the way in which we want to keep our, we don't want to cut our patrol number. So that's why we're making the decision to cut them at a specialty position, because we don't feel that we can go less than we have now in patrol.
I'll just help you with where I'm going. I think you could go with more in patrol.
Yes.
So that's why I'm asking the question.
Yes, but absolutely, if we were able to hire and bring ourselves up to full strength, I would 100% want to put more in patrol. There's no doubt about that. Or even if they weren't in patrol, creating other positions, because part of recruitment and retention is having specialty positions.
Okay.
You know, I can give you an example. Our community action team, which is the officers that you see on bicycles, it's actually one of the most, quote, popular specialty assignments. So we're doing a temporary assignment for an officer who's going to be off for a medical procedure. And we have over 10 officers that have already applied for a position in there. And by adding positions in there, they actually take away from some of the things that patrol has to respond to. So I think that's the other balance, is at what point do we hit kind of the sweet spot, so to speak, for
Right.
patrol officers, and then creating other specialty assignments that are appropriate to where we're at now, because that is part of a retention and recruitment, is having those specialized assignments.
So I guess let me just expand my question. I'd love to hear what the holding one, the holding two, and then the holding two dollar amounts are.
Yep.
And then I'd love to hear a narrative on your druthers, a short narrative on your druthers, that if we're talking about finding that kind of money, is that really what you want first, or would you rather have patrol officers, or what? It's one specialty sergeant and one patrol officer versus the two positions. That's kind of what I'm really asking for, to hear some more of an ask than this is what we'll make do with, and see what that looks like numerically and also from a narrative from you.
I think we'd have to sit down, because I could give you the numbers. I understand what you're asking now. So I do think it's a balance, but we can certainly sit down and give you those numbers.
And then multiple years, right? We've been doing this officer to police technician dance, right?
Yep.
And then, so, kind of a rhetorical question, is that just to say you're holding continually for whatever amount of time? I could give you a water use bar slide rant to make my point there on how much water we use and why keep it at 15 million acre feet a year. But at what point does it, you're not just holding anymore, at what point have de facto you lost that? Or is there an administrative reason to still keep showing those as holding year after year?
Well, my hope would be is for us to determine what is the actual number that we need for today in terms of sworn personnel to effectively provide public safety here in Santa Barbara, and then make that adjustment, or come back to you and say, I need 142 sworn, plus I need 6 police technicians.
Okay.
And I think,
So-
part of that, I know, and Chief Malekian was trying to get to the point where he could try this and see if it's successful. I think we're seeing that it's successful, so we may come back at, next year and say, let's eliminate those 3 positions in terms of them being sworn, and let's make them technician positions permanently. I just know that we haven't done this long enough for us to make that ask yet.
Okay. I guess, I just presume you're just latching onto this 142 number as we can effectively do our job, but I just, my sense is generally that word effectively right now is all over the place. And so I hate to see you talk like that, where, yep, we can put this down on a piece of paper and call it effectively, but what we've basically done somewhere behind the scenes is erode the meaning of effectively from what effectively was before. And I'll ask it as a question so I don't get out of line here, but I'll give you an example. So it's still true today that, say at 5 o'clock in the evening, we have 1 patrol officer in a vehicle per section of town, but we answer almost every call, at least initially, with 2 officers. So an officer is also coming to join that officer geographically to at least at the minimum ascertain that you don't need 2 officers there and can release, but my experience, most times, if not all the time, there is a period of time where 2 officers are needed, and it takes from another section where an officer would be, right? Now, my parents' era, there would have been 2 officers in every vehicle, right? So the definition of effective has become 1 officer in a vehicle with another coming to join him or her. whereas probably before effective would have been 2 officers in every vehicle in every part of town. So that's the kind of worry, I did never ask the question, did I?
No, you did not.
But that's the
No.
but that's the kind of worry that I have when we categorize something as effective levels of policing, but the behind the scenes is it's a different effective than was effective 5 years or 10 years ago. And so how do we help you get to a better level of effective rather than having a level of effective thrust upon you?
I think the thing for us at this point is that we need to be able to recruit, hire, and retain.
Okay.
I can't effectively answer that question for you, quite frankly. I mean, besides the fact that I've been here a whole 7 months. But based on 27 years of experience and working in different departments, and what I have observed here, I can't actually effectively answer that question for you until we can actually hire up to the point where then we can evaluate whether we need those positions or not, or if we need more. Because I can't, quite frankly, at this moment, tell you that.
Okay.
We're short, so trying to tell you whether that 142 number is actually what we need at this moment, I can't sit here and tell you I know that.
Okay.
Because what I need from council and what I need for us to be able to do is I need for us to find a way to recruit, hire, and retain.
Okay,
And
fair
that
enough.
it's really, quite frankly, boils down to that. Because if we can do that, then we can determine what that effective number is.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll have some comments at the end.
Okay. Yeah, we got to put question marks in there somewhere. That's good. Ms. Ned.
Thank you, Mayor Rouse. I'll also say my comments, but a question. So from that line of questioning and everything we hear is that we need more patrol, more patrol, more patrol. And the issue, I mean, I've often said, well, we have it funded, but we're having issues with recruiting, and we're working on that, but it's funded, and we've set aside the funds. It's not a matter of defunding anything. We have the funds, and I'm really worried or questioning here what effect this has on our ability to say, it's funded, but we're working on recruiting. But more importantly, what impact does having any kind of cuts have on our ability to recruit? Like, what message does that send to someone looking to join a department? And you've done a really excellent job of promoting all the intangibles, but if the message is that this department is needing to do cuts and they don't have enough patrol people and people are stretched thin, how does that impact the ability to recruit?
Well, it does, in fact. There's no way to say it does not. So
That's-
it does, in fact. And like I said, we know that we have a very tall and difficult task. And we also know the city has to make some significant decisions. But yes, that makes it difficult, absolutely. I think the only side of that is that we then also can say that we are committed to, the other things that we've talked about in terms of, training and other things within the department, that we're still showing that we're committed to the folks that we have. So I can't say it doesn't impact us.
Absolutely, and you've definitely come prepared with the answer to the question of how you would make cuts or adjustments that you needed to make. The answer to that question, I think, is very significant, that doing so sends a message of a department unable to be as enticing. So, thank you.
All right, very good. Just one quick question, Chief. New thing with the concealed carry cost permits.
Yes.
Is there a startup cost to that, or is there a capital cost to that program?
That's all been an internal cost in terms of staff work and
Okay.
legal work.
I
So
didn't know if there was any kind of technology or something else you had to.
we are
actually-
leveraging a company to help us with that, and that
Right.
is part of the fee recovery piece, is part of using that company to accomplish this. So it cuts down a little bit on our staff time, because there's a lot that goes into this whole process.
I think most of us would hope there's not a lot of traffic in that area. All right, very good. Are there any public comments for this item? Seeing none, we'll go back to council, and if there are any closing comments, I'll let Ms. Gutierrez go first, since you had your light on before.
Thank you, Chief, for this presentation. I'm really happy to hear that you are putting a lot of efforts in training for your officers and everyone else that works in your department. I think it's really important for big organizations like the city and the different universities here in town to really promote within. You talk about the Santa Barbara factor. It makes me laugh because born and raised here, I think we're very privileged that we don't get to go through that, but I've seen it with close friends. It is a Santa Barbara factor. And we're a very unique community, so being able to really promote from within helps not only that time that the officer spends that comes from the outside, finding a place to live, but to get to know the community. We're a very tight-knit community, and when you promote within, it makes a huge difference. I've seen it in different organizations as well. So I'm really happy that our new chief is really putting a lot of effort in that, and I think everybody that works under you is probably really happy about that as well. I'm also very concerned about slide 23. I know that Ms. Bjork probably doesn't want to hear this, but I'm willing to do whatever we can in our budget to be able to give you as much money to retain officers. I totally understand about the special projects because they are officers that are sworn that have been working for the department for a while that go and do these special projects. But I think right now we hear it over and over during council meetings, the need of an officer present. And the police department, I think, has shown the community their willingness to work with the community and be very transparent. It does hurt me to know that we have to cut these officers because they do make a huge difference when it comes to the community connection. So my position is to help the PD in giving them funding to open these holds for the officers and maybe keeping one of the special officers' assignment. But I just wanted to thank the whole department and your commanders and sergeants that are here today for all the work that you've done. I understand it hasn't been easy for the staff. They've gone through, since I was here, 3 chiefs now with you, and it just really amazes me that this department has kept afloat and with their head held high. And I'm just really thankful, Chief, that I'm hearing that you want to invest in this department and the people that are working there. So thank you.
Mr. Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So overall impression is I'm uncomfortable in these situations where people just kind of strap on the instructions they were given, particularly in public safety or first responders, and just say, yep, you told me cut it by 3%, cut it by 5%, here's what we're going to do, and we can go do it. And you don't also give me the ask on and the narrative on really what it does and how to get you back to where we should be, what we're doing. I know people don't even know about this dynamic of the 1 officer per vehicle and having to come from another section of town. Because that was a year ago, that was an eye-opener for my ride along. I know people don't get why one day they can see officers on State Street and then not see them for 2 months. I know there's a story there, but there's just, I think I just really would like to I'm happy, I get why we see this, happy to see this, but I'd really like to see some more between now and when we get to the end of this process on, a little more narrative on just really what are the impacts from this and what would it take to avoid those impacts, and then what would it take to get to whatever somebody's idea is of better effective policing rather than effective policing. Then just a couple points on the couple pages. On me, it's this. I think it's this page and the next page with the round circle. So there's a story to tell here that I generally just think across the city we tell very tell very poorly. We tell like in media release forms, or it's on social media that it may come up on your line or it may not come up on your line, so you never see it. And so an example, I'll just give you a couple examples that resonate with me, and that's the narrative you just had with Mr. Friedman on what would be, the way I hear you, a tangible impact on recruitment, both recruitment and retention, with a pending new police station. I've been in the police station 8 years ago as a planning commissioner, all the way down in the cellar with the leaking pipes and stuff, and it's horrible. It's absolutely horrible. If I was a new police officer coming into that, I'd be going, why did I pick this police organization, maybe compared to some others? But that story's not told. I don't think that story's out there. I still get emails today saying, oh, look, now you can put the farmer's market back over here and move the police station to the Sears lot. And I'm just going, okay, wait, just stop. We're about to cut ground break ground, and this will be such a benefit to our efforts to bring exactly what many in the community feel are lacking, and that's a more coverage for law enforcement, better and effective policing. And we don't tell that story well from a personal level. We tell it from a press release or a media release level, but we don't humanize it, I guess, would be. I mean, I'm not in this field of work, so I don't know. I just, again, I'm back to like smelling this and saying, could be better, but I don't really know how to make it better. But that's one example. Another example is best event I ever went to concerning your department, and it might have been before you were here, was the last swearing in of 8 new, okay, I see Mary Linda, swearing in of 8 new officers up in the county court there, I think the juror room or something. Great event. All the families are there. Council was there. And you get to actually go over and meet the spouse and the children of the officers and their parents in some case. Great event. That's the type of what I can't describe but smells really good to me, and how to sell Santa Barbara and how to humanize the process of working here, being invited into a family, people that have an interest with you. I would personally do that with anybody in the 1,200 person organization. I would get a little more excited about doing it with anything having to do with the first responder, and then I'd get really excited about doing it with first responders that are hard to attract and retain to this city. That would be the ultimate driving force for me. So that's, I guess, just anecdotally, that's 2 suggestions I would have to look forward to as you're going forward. And then I think this presentation's really light to me also on an ask for tangible recruiting efforts. Now, I may be wrong, but to me, one of the tangible recruiting carrots is money. And I don't see that you're really asking for money here, whether that's what we've done in the past for increasing the pay for new hires or offering relocation bonuses. I heard a story, I think the other day maybe, on what Santa Maria is doing and how they're luring people up there with a $30,000 signing bonus. You talked about the commute earlier, and those people certainly that are commuting an hour or plus into town are totally at risk of being grabbed by somebody else as soon as a job that matches exactly what they're doing now. It doesn't have to be better, but just loses the commute. And so what more would you need in a budget process to also launch and both better recruit and retain in that particular case? That's, again, another ask I would appreciate to see before we get to the end of this process.
And just on that note, I don't know that I'm going to have that for you before the end of this process. And I'm just going to be upfront about it. I've been here 7 months, and that is something that we are working really hard with our team. That is part of next year's goal, is to figure out what that looks like. And what I don't want to do is just come to you with
A placeholder.
a place, I
okay
mean, we
with
can
that.
come to you with a placeholder. Like, we're having these really hard discussions and trying to work through that, but we also want to be thoughtful about what that's going to be. So it's hard to, it's hard to come with an ask at the same time we're coming with a cut.
Right.
And so I will just be very upfront about that. It's not that we're not thinking about these things. We certainly can come back with an ask, but I don't know that I'm going to have a great ask for you in the next 2 to 3 weeks. These are hard discussions that we're having, and we can certainly come back with a placeholder and try to come back with an overall. But we also know that then there is negotiations, there's the unions, and there's another piece of it that goes into that in terms of salary and compensation that I can't come in here and speak for. So I appreciate the feedback. We certainly will come back with the other, and you'll see another event like the swearing in once we get this next class out of the academy. We are actually modeling that in several other things that we're doing, and absolutely, we can highlight that more. And that's a process, because that's a culture shift for us. So that's one of those things that takes some time as we make those changes, but we'll certainly come back with telling more of the story in terms of the numbers. But I do want to be upfront with City Council in terms of, I'm not sure what our ask is at this point in terms of recruitment.
Fair enough.
I don't know what that is, because we are still working through that process. And like I said, it's taken me a few months to figure out exactly what we're doing and be able to be thoughtful about that. And at the same time, new oversight and the audit. So we're now to a place where we can focus on exactly what you're talking about.
Okay, fair enough. I'll just tell you, personally speaking for me, you have 6 other herding cats to placate to, but speaking for me, I would rather you err in setting up placeholders and talking about concepts and making sure that you're building that idea from the start right now, rather than be in the middle of a budget year and things are either good, bad, or whatever, and then you have to try to wrangle some funds from somewhere. That's just how I feel about it, because I think it's important enough. So, thanks.
Point well taken.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
All right, very good. I know Chief's got some place she's got to be at some point, so just please bear that in mind for our closing comments. Mr. Friedman.
Thank you. I will be brief. First, I just want to thank you, Chief, for very informative. You have my attention. You have all of our attention. And just like I'm sure that the fire department is going to have my attention in about 20 minutes from now on these. So, and I bring that up first is I appreciate your answer to the questions about coming forward with an ask right now. It was a very thoughtful answer, just like what you brought forward is thoughtful. And that your priorities right now, you mentioned, is training, because that's a recruitment issue, and keeping that longevity here, but also the recruitment and retention. And it could very well be that the biggest factor of that is compensation, and that's a much larger discussion that we have to have over time. But I would just say, in terms of the approach of how we're going to address the vacancies and get to the point where we can even have the conversation of what the number is. Is it 142? Is it less? Is it more? To your point, we need to get back to there first, is to continue on the course that we're on, which is the fiscal sustainability initiative that all the departments are going through right now, because that's what it's for. And it's not an easy process, and I commend Ms. Bjork and Mr. DiMartini for leading that, our finance director, and working with all the departments. And that's why it's ultimately going to have the council is going to be the one body that is going to have to make these difficult decisions. And we need to get through all the budget hearings to see if we add here today to the police, where does that come from outside a new revenue source? And so, and for me, that's the important part, is we look at the budget as a whole and have that discussion before we make any commitments. And so, again, that's what the initiative is for in the Vision 2030. So I appreciate what you're doing now and those difficult decisions, but we as council need to hear all the different departments, and then we're going to have to make some difficult decisions. It's not going to be easy this year. And each department is going to show us something that we're going to want to keep funded. And then we're going to have to figure out where the priority is, and it could be here. There's a good case to be made for it. But for me, I'm waiting to see the whole budget as a whole as it comes forward. So thank you.
Ms. Sneddon?
Thank you, Mayor Rouse. I'll just put it out front. I just can't see cutting any funds from public safety. I'm just going to say that now, and that's going to hold true throughout this entire budget process. I already know that's what my view will be. I really appreciate that you made tough recommendations and that you're thoughtfully looking at the whole department for efficiencies and everything that you can. But I'm just thinking that taxpayers don't want us to cut funding from public safety. That's not why they passed Measure C, which isn't for salaries, but it shows a priority in public safety and wanting that to be available. That's how I see that. You mentioned the half-cent safety tax. I mean, that wasn't passed because people didn't want funds to go to public safety. So I just see public safety as has to be made whole. Somewhere between last year and this year, I think it's become sort of painfully clear to the community that we do not have the critical mass of patrol that we need to feel as safe as we could. And that is reaching all neighborhoods everywhere. I'm not real happy about this story, but when I called for police backup and they never came, to my house in an active event. And that was, neighbors then started sharing stories. And I know that's not where the police want to be. They want to be everywhere. You want to be everywhere, taking care of everyone equally. And it's just become really clear that we're not at the critical mass that we need. That 70% on slide 24, 70% is not stellar. That's not the number we want. We need to get that 18% back. And it really is beginning to show to everyone. And I just don't believe that the community is looking to us to make cuts in public safety. But I appreciate you coming forward and saying what would happen. I think it's really important that these positions stay funded, and we send that very clear message that our issue is recruitment right now, and that if we can have those intangibles and if we can have the new station and have other ways to recruit, that those positions will be funded. I don't think it's in our interest to have sort of attrition because they aren't being filled. Other comments, I really, really appreciate the emphasis on homegrown department. I believe in the officers that we have, that we should be having those opportunities from within and recruiting from the community. There's just such a difference when you go to these events and you're meeting an officer that you met when they were 10 years old and their brother is also serving and you worked with their mother, and that's a personal experience that it's like, oh, this is my community all together. And I think that the messaging of that and the effects of that are really strong. So I really appreciate the emphasis on that. And with that comes training and opportunities. And I also want to say again how much I appreciate the focus on officer wellness. If officers aren't taking care of themselves and mental health and physical well-being, then they're less able to be there for the traumatic incidents within the community as well. And it's really important that we're looking after that. So thank you for that, but I'm just going to put that out here now, and I think it'll carry through that in public safety. I just don't see that we're doing the community a service by cutting.
Ms. Harmon?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, I also will express my appreciation. Yesterday and today, we've received so much information from you and about your department and the good work that you all do. So very, very much appreciated, and agree with someone used the word thoughtful in the way that you presented this information, and it very much was, and was very helpful to me in understanding just the broader context for you and your department and the work that you all are doing for us. So thank you very much. I'm just going to weigh in very briefly, and I agree with my colleagues, actually, before I do that, the wellness work, I mean, all of these programs that you're doing are stellar, and so truly, really, really fantastic work. I wanted to weigh in on this question of cutting or not cutting, because it seems that's a little bit of a debate that we're having up here, and I would say, for me, in an ideal world, we wouldn't have that slide 23 at all. We would never see anything like that. I want to see all of the positions filled. I want to see salaries very high. I want to see us turning people away. And I mean, yes, that is what we want, and I believe that is what we are all working toward. In the context in which we find ourselves, I'm just not sure that it is feasible for us to say across the board, no cuts anywhere. And I like Councilmember Friedman would just say that I need to see the whole picture, really, before I make any statement on that. And I also want to say I trust you, Chief, in your recommendation, and that you understand our values as a city in terms of keeping our community safe, and that you would not be making a recommendation if you believed that it would be to the detriment of the safety of our community. So I wanted to put it out there, just simply that I know none of us would want to hold any of these positions open if we did not have to, but that I trust that you understand how critical, more than any of us do, how critical your role is, and that you wouldn't put that slide up there if you didn't know that we could continue to provide this service for the community, and that this was putting us on a path to maintaining sustainability so that our department can stay strong and growing in that over time. So with all that said, I guess I understand the importance and the need for recruitment and retention, and thank you for your willingness to be part of this Vision 2030 process. And as we go through the coming weeks and months, I know we'll all be thinking about how to put this all together in a holistic way that appropriately values all the things that are so critical to us in our community, including the good work that you all do. Thank you.
All right, very good. Well, if there's no further comments, we'll thank you guys. Appreciate that, and we'll let you get out of here and move on to fire.
Thank you.
Do you want a break?
Yes, I need a couple.
Okay, well, make it quick, because we got to get these guys out of here too. So, yeah, go ahead, take 5 minutes if you need a break. Chief.
Good afternoon, Mayor Rouse, members of council. Chris Males, I'm your fire chief. Thank you for the opportunity to chat with you a little bit this afternoon. Before we start, I wanted to introduce my team to you. I have one very new member that you probably haven't met before, so I wanted to make sure that we have put a face to the name. To my left is Amy Van Atta. She is our new business manager. Amy replaced Ron Lichty, who retired. Amy comes to us with 5 years of experience on the business side with Oxnard Fire Department, and previously to that, she was with the Oxnard Police Department for 7 years. So she comes to us as our new business manager, and we are happy to have her. So she'll get a little bit of time before you today. Next to me on my right is Division Chief Brian Fetterman. He's been with our department for about 18 months. He came to us from Lompoc Fire Department. And then you have myself, who's the 30-year veteran, and then you have behind me Ryan DiGiulio, who's sitting in the bullpen here. He'll be coming up at some point, but he is our fire marshal. So with that, that's 4 of the 5 of our command staff. Stacy Rosenberger, who is also new to our organization, she started just before the holidays, is at a conference, and so she won't be joining us today. So before I begin, there will be some similarities in our presentation with Chief Gordon. Some of the statements that she made regarding morale and a sustainable workforce, I really appreciate her comments of taking care of the employees because it's very central to us also. Just for reference, we have 106 full-time equivalents in our department, so we're almost just roughly about half the size of the police department. We too have embraced Vision 2030. We have team members working throughout the different committees in Vision 2030 to create a more sustainable workforce, thriving workforce, fiscal sustainability, et cetera. We also are clear and acknowledge the fact that the city has a structural deficit. And so what we'll be presenting today does adhere to the request that we received to make some changes to our department to be a little bit more fiscally conservative. We have 2 years of cuts that we'll present. Some are set in a sense that we have recommendations, but the second year we don't have firm recommendations yet, but we're absolutely willing to work with finance and city administration to get there. So following the consistent agenda, we will be talking about key messages with a department overview. We'll be looking at revenues followed by expenditures or expenses. We will look at Core 3 also, and we'll look at capital programs. So, next slide. First off, some significant accomplishments for fiscal year 23. I've picked 4. The first is the ambulance contract. Although the county issues the contract for ambulance services in the county of Santa Barbara, you likely saw that the county has made a swift departure from the norm and is looking at contracting with county fire department and a private ambulance company at this point. It's a little premature to discuss how it's going to look. Frankly, we don't know. But one of the things that's very important and has been important to me from the very beginning is that this be a community-focused EMS system that gives back to the community. And in fact, my task when working on this, on the ambulance contract, was to look at forming a sustainable workforce. I heard the term homegrown. That was the term that I used. I actually began discussions at the high school level of doing, working to recruit people into fire, EMS, and law enforcement. So we'll be working with partnerships with both San Marcos High School and Rigetti High School. Rigetti High School is looking at starting a first responder academy, so that would be for law enforcement also. We're really hoping that this ambulance contract does generate a homegrown employee that we can start, say, working on an ambulance, and they could become the fire chief someday or a police chief someday and remain in our community. So significant changes you should hear about in the next couple of months with that. Regional dispatch is moving along. The fire department will be moving to regional dispatch on July 1 of 2024. The regional center will be opening sometime around April or May of '24. However, the two largest cities, Santa Maria and Santa Barbara, will join on July 1, which I actually am in favor of because they'll work the bugs out, if there are any bugs. And then Santa Barbara and Santa Maria will join with our 10,000 plus call volume each. As you may have seen in the news last week, they broke ground on that, and they're looking at about just over a year timeline. While it sounds, oh boy, we're going to be shifting to a regional dispatch, there's a lot of work behind it, that goes behind it. Everything from similar fire engines laid out to similar services provided to, of course, the closest available resource that we talked about. There's a lot of work going on behind the scenes at all levels of our department, but we're confident that this is going to be a big game changer for our community to have all of the additional fire engines ready for us to respond into the city at any time. The third accomplishment, I'll call it an accomplishment, but it's ongoing, is our standards of cover study. We are in the final phases of review of a standards of cover study. This will be our blueprint for the next 3 to 5 years, with a consultant making recommendations on what the fire department should be doing. It's very nicely laid out with short, medium, and long-range goals. Sure, there's a few pie-in-the-sky things, but there's some stuff that we can do just to change operationally that I think will make our department much more successful. Part of the reason for a little bit of the delay of the standards of cover study is that council approved a fee study to be done by the same consultant. So they shifted from their standards of cover study to the fee study, and they are working on the fee study diligently. Looking into Vision 2030. We are looking as a department to just have fees that are standard in the industry, that are sustainable in our community. We're not looking at developing a whole bunch of additional first responder fees or anything like that. It's more on the fire prevention side. And so when that comes out, we will absolutely run it through Finance and Council for approval, but that's in the works right now. So those are our main accomplishments. I don't want to de-emphasize the over 11,500 calls for service that we're running in the community each year from our 8 fire stations, but these are more kind of behind the scenes of what the department's doing to complete its vision or its ongoing vision for making sure that we're relevant and that we're doing the best job we can for our community. So the fire department has 7 programs that we oversee. The first of operations, that's our largest piece of the pie. Operations is basically everything involving responding to a call, the actual operational side of the fire department. And we do that from our 8 fire stations with 29 personnel on duty. As I was listening to Chief Gordon's comments about her shifts and schedules, and boy, it makes ours look very simple. Our firefighters work a 48-hour shift. They come in for 48 hours, and then they're off for 4 days. This is a very, very common schedule in Southern California. We started it probably 15 years ago, and it has quickly become the norm in Southern California, and it was largely used as a recruitment and retention tool. We come in for 2 days straight, and then they're off. Now, we're going to talk about overtime. Our firefighters do work overtime, and that is also an industry norm for firefighters to be working overtime, and we'll explain why we have overtime. But that's been going on since horse-drawn buggies and Dalmatians in fire stations. We have what's called constant staffing. And that means that 24/7, 365, we have 29 firefighters on duty. We run 3-person engine companies and a 4-person truck. If the personnel, somebody has to go to jury duty or goes home sick, we replace them as soon as possible. We always have 29 people on duty, and that means even if we have people out of town on fires. That is a staffing decision, of course, by us to keep robust community service, but it's also an MOU item for both the fire managers and for the firefighters themselves. They have a clause in their contract that says we'll have 28 people on duty every day. However, that is good coverage for the city of Santa Barbara. We also have training. We have a mighty team of 2, a training chief and training captain who handle all of our training mandates. That is everything from EMS, our EMT certifications, to our hazardous materials certifications, to our ocean lifeguard certifications. They also handle all of the ongoing training that's required by us to maintain our fire department. Aircraft rescue and firefighting, also known as ARF, that is the firefighting resources at Fire Station 8. Fire Station 8 is paid for by the Airport Enterprise Fund. 100% of the airport station is covered by the Enterprise Fund. We will show it to you in our budget, but it's a transfer from the airport to cover those 3 personnel 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. We also have fire prevention. Chief DeJulio will talk about it, and we do have some exciting updates for you to share regarding wildland fire mitigation, updates on grants especially. The Office of Emergency Services, as I mentioned, is Stacy Rosenberger. She, as I've said to many people in the city, her office physically lies in the fire department, but she works for every single department in the city. She is the emergency manager for the entire city of Santa Barbara. So we house her in our building. She works really closely with Public Works and the police department, but she really is a resource available to the entire city. And then you have fire administration. Myself and then Amy to my left lead the fire administration division. You've all seen this map before, but I just wanted to share with you that the city fire department has 8 fire stations strategically located. We were talking about it earlier today. The people that decided back in 1929 where to put Fire Station 3 at 415 East Sola, they were well ahead of their time. I don't know how they did it without GIS data and all that, but our fire stations are really, really well located in the city of Santa Barbara. And in fact, the consultant was commenting on the hot spots of calls actually seem to be really, really close in geography to our fire stations, which is good. So we'll talk about the 6 fire stations. I won't name them all, but 6 fire stations, 1 through 6, that are really kind of more in the downtown core and the Mesa, run the majority of our 11,500 calls. Station 7, which is up on Stanwood and Mission Ridge, has a very low call volume, as does the airport. I always like to articulate that it's very, very safe to fly out of Santa Barbara Airport, and truly the best call is no call when it comes to airport firefighting. They're largely there as a standby. Most of their incidents actually involve general aviation rather than airlines, but they are there as part of an FAA requirement. So really, over 11,000 of our calls are handled by our 6 stations, and then you have Station 7 and Station 8 that handle. One thing that's really important to note, though, is we're talking about incidents. So when I mention 11,500 incidents, that's a call, let's say at 900 State. We also have what are called unit movements, and that means more than 1 unit goes on the call. So for a structure fire, we have 5 units that respond to that 1 incident. So when you're looking at actually how many units move around town, we're more up in the 14 to 15,000 range, because we send 2 engines to a cardiac arrest. We send 2 rigs to an elevator call, things like that. Right now, we are trending at about 63% medical. And then we have about 9% additional injuries, such as injury traffic accidents, bicycles, et cetera, for a total of about 72% medical and injury related. Our fire call volume is about 10%. About 70% of our calls are red lights and siren through to completion, from the time the call comes in to the time we arrive on scene. About 70 to 75% are deemed true emergency calls. This is just an example of our current org chart, or organizational chart. We have 106 full-time equivalents. You will see in our presentation that we are recommending not filling one fire inspector position, dissolving that position, so we'd go to 105 equivalents. But what I'd like to share with you is that now that you've seen our org chart, all of the positions in gray are covered by an MOU. We have 2 MOUs. We have one for the fire managers, that's for the 4 battalion chiefs, training battalion chief, and then battalion chief A, B, and C, and the fire marshal. And then from captain level and below, including all of the staff in fire prevention, we have an MOU, and that MOU talks about the coverage. We have to have those firefighters in place, and we also have to have a minimum of 6 personnel in the fire prevention division. So why do I bring this up? Because when we are tasked with making cuts, it's very difficult to touch any position in an MOU, and so really what we're looking at is the positions that are in white, including mine. We do have some difficulty in looking for position cuts when 2 MOUs protect the employees. So we had to get very strategic, and so we'll share that in just a few minutes. Finance asked us to talk about what does a 3% raise mean for the city fire department, and it's $709,000 is what it equates to. That's an all-in 3% raise, is a $709,000 raise. You may have heard the term all risk. We are an all-risk fire department. We've put some pictures up so that you can see some of the things that our folks do. Just going across from left to right, we have someone set up in an urban search and rescue equipment. And by the way, this is personal protective equipment. This is all equipment that has to be furnished by the department or provided by the department. So we have urban search and rescue. And what is that? That is confined space. That is rope rescue. That is trench rescue. That is structural collapse. Give you an example of something I did not think I'd see in my career. We just deployed 6 urban search and rescue people to Mammoth Lakes to help with the massive amount of snowfall and subsequent fires that they were having due to the propane explosions. So we had 6 urban search and rescue people that were deployed at Mammoth for a period of about 2 weeks, a couple of months ago. Second from the left, at the top is our structural firefighting, followed by wildland. And the top right is our hazardous materials team. That is what's called a level A suit. That is a completely encapsulated suit. Someone that would go into the most dangerous of hazardous materials. We have a hazardous materials team on duty. We have 3 firefighters at Station 2 that are hazmat specialists. Bottom left is our aircraft rescue firefighting apparatus. And then just an example of the equipment that we carry on our urban search and rescue unit. That is a state-designated heavy rescue. When I give an occasional tour at the fire department, I affectionately call that Home Depot on wheels. That literally has about every tool you could possibly need. Bottom right is actually one of our ocean rescue swimmers. We have about 20 United States Lifeguard Association certified ocean rescue swimmers. That is the highest certification you can have. We have 20 of our folks that are USLA certified. Contrary to many questions that I get, no, those are not surfboards on top of the fire truck. Those are rescue boards for our ocean rescue team. So again, they are certified to go out into the ocean, and all of this requires not only time and money, but it's certifications, it's training, it's ongoing training, it's paying for the certifications, having outside instructors come in, all of those kind of things that come with being an all-risk fire department. The one slide you don't see up there, one picture you don't see is medical. During COVID, they looked more like the upper right. They were almost totally encapsulated, but now we're back to wearing just our regular day uniforms. But really the largest percentage of our calls are medical. Okay. Okay, and then I'd like to turn it over to Ms. Van Atta.
Good afternoon.
There you go. There you go.
I'm new. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Ms. Fernando. Welcome to the team.
Thank you very much. As I arrived, I was gifted the fun of the review of the budget with the unfortunate need to cut back. So where I began was to take an overall look of the budget, general fund, and I looked at the fiscal year '23 operating expenses to see where we might be able to alleviate some of this. As you can see, there's not much room. We have 85% of our budget dedicated to salaries and benefits. Allocated costs are fixed costs for other departments, fleet, facilities, IT, represented another 10% of the budget. Operating expenses came to $1.3 million, which is 4%. That is where we actually have some decision-making over what we spend that money on. But that's everything from our wellness, fitness, physical fitness assessments, to purchasing hose, foam, and all of that PPE that you saw on the previous slide. The tricky thing about that is all of the PPE has lifespan. They time out based on use or based on age. So the SCBAs, things like that, we can't go without them, and they do require replacement on a regular schedule. Special projects, that's the academy and some of our wildland mitigation, so that couldn't be touched, and our debt service. To reiterate part of what the chief said, one of the questions about salaries that comes up quite a bit is, well, fire department uses a lot of overtime, so why don't you just cut back on your overtime? Much easier said than done. What's represented here is 5 years of our budget, our overtime budget. The constant staffing is shown at the bottom in blue and ranges between $2.2 million to $3.1 million, depending on the year. So this is when somebody goes on jury duty, sick leave, had COVID, and had to be backfilled. That's what it took to keep the stations open that day. The little tiny bar in orange is the money spent on overtime for people going to training. So if someone goes to training and they normally work at Station 1, the days that they were on shift need to be backfilled, and the days that they're out of the office, we pay them. Then you go up to mutual aid, and this is a moving target. As you can see, in 2020, there was only $415,000, while in 2018, there was $2.2 million in overtime and backfill that was spent on mutual aid assignments. This is cost recovery. We spent the money and it was reimbursed. The one thing that, sorry, I got ahead of myself. The one thing that should be said about the constant staffing, to step back just a second, is if we have vacancies. Currently, we have an academy that started this week, but we were running with 6 vacancies. That means that we did have savings in the salaries and benefits, but did pay in our overtime. So you see it reflected in the overtime, because I'm just looking at overtime on this slide. But to dig a little bit further into the mutual aid, because that is a very interesting topic, and cost recovery, I'd like to hand it over to Chief Fetterman.
Afternoon, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. As we all are very well aware of the mutual aid system in the state of California, predominantly we think of it as the wildland side, but as the chief mentioned, we're seeing it all throughout the year with all kinds of natural disasters. It's a proud thing for us as an agency and a community to be a part of, to support our partners, because we've been such great recipients of the support of the state of California, other fire and EMS agencies that have come and helped our community in time of need. During these mutual aids, one thing that's important to understand is the intent and expectation is for it to be 100% cost recovery. So when we are deployed through the mutual aid agreement process, we are reimbursed for our expenses, up to and including the apparatus that go out, and a small portion for administrative. So when you see below the $1.5 million that's allocated into the budget, really that's a proactive approach by the city leadership to upfront the costs to allow us to participate in this system, and then we would receive it back later on. Next slide. What's hard with this, and you've seen the trends of increase in the mutual aid allocation into our budget, this image shows some of the fire history that we've experienced over the years. And in 2017, the Thomas Fire at the time was the largest in the state of California. And now we have far exceeded that. So how do we budget and forecast and plan for the impacts of mutual aid? That's a really good question. And so we try to do our best with working with projections and what we think we'll see in the mutual aid side. And again, that's why you're seeing an increase in this year is for the projections of 24 and 25 that may be impacted to our department's budget.
Afternoon, Mayor Rouse, council members, Ryan DiGiulio, Fire Marshal. Thanks, Chief Fetterman. So what are we going to do so that we don't have to tap into this mutual aid system in our own backyard here? Unfortunately, as Chief Fetterman mentioned, we've seen the fairgrounds full of fire engines from all over the place. So what proactive measurements can we do in the Fire Prevention Bureau, in my shop, to maybe mitigate some of those future events that might happen? So a quick update on what's going on, especially in the vegetation management in our wildland division. We were able to successfully tree 20 acres of vegetation in Honda Valley, which is new for us to focus on that area of the city. Did some really good, solid work in there and worked well with the Parks Department. We obtained a $525,000 grant from the Coastal Conservancy that we're really excited about for a couple reasons. One, it's a great collaboration with the Parks Department. We've been working well with them to accomplish some of their goals and also accomplish some of our fire mitigation goals. With that money too, we're also going to, for the first time in the fire department's history, hire a 5 or 6 person hourly fuels crew. So what does that consist of? It looks like the hotshot crews that you see on the news, but it's pared down. We don't have to rely on contractors to perform some of that work. We get to do that work ourselves. We get to accomplish a lot more in the CWPP and the projects that are laid out in those areas with our own folks. That comes with our own chipper as well, and we can give those chips back to some of those folks in that area. We're really excited about that program and look forward to the outcome from that grant. Some of the money that we have allocated in vegetation management, 95,000 of that was used for some bioservices within the different units that we're trying to implement as far as vegetation management goes. So as you can imagine, there's a lot of biological work and study that needs to happen prior to us conducting some of this vegetation management work. So this, a chunk of that money within our current budget is being used for that currently. We just awarded a $14,000 contract for some grazing of sheep up in Parma Park. And I can tell you that yesterday or the day before, the sheep are at Elings down below, not in the city area quite yet, but they've started there and they're going to work their way up. So as you can imagine, there's a lot to munch on this year for the sheep. So we found that to be a really, really effective way and a low impact way as far as using mechanized equipment to accomplish some of these vegetation management goals. So it's one of those ideas that we've been thinking about outside the box that's really come to fruition. So it's worked out quite well. We've also put in a grant with CAL FIRE for $2.8 million that would last until 2029. I can tell you that the state and even some federal agencies have really, really upped their level of grant availability. They're really seeing the benefits of wildland fire mitigation and prevention measures, both in the vegetation itself and with homeowners for hardening their house and upgrading their house in these wildland, high fire areas, wildland areas. That grant is really exciting for us too, because again, it's a collaboration with the Parks Department. So just because it's a CAL FIRE grant doesn't mean we can't work with other entities within the city to accomplish multiple goals under one grant. So it's kind of a way to be a little bit more efficient. So we're excited about that. And again, our CWPP, as you know, our Community Wildfire Protection Plan is our roadmap. And we have now gained some momentum through these grants and some people in our prevention division to start implementing some of those ideas and kind of vegetation management units that are broken down within both the coastal and the Riviera high fire hazard areas. So we're excited to see the ball finally rolling, and we're getting some efforts for this season, which is going to be paramount with the amount of vegetation that has grown this year. Thank you.
And just a couple of things to emphasize while Chief DiGiulio is going back and Ms. Van Atta is coming up. The $2.8 million grant with CAL FIRE actually was submitted by Parks Department with our help. So Parks will likely talk about it, so I want to make sure that you know it's one and the same. But we don't have any definitive answer on it. We heard that they did their first review last week down south, and I know that we weren't excluded, so that's good. So I think that's going on. And then one thing I also wanted to emphasize is due to the good work with vegetation management, the community of Miramonte area has become the first fire-wise community in the city of Santa Barbara. We have other communities that we'll be working with, but what group is it again?
Fire State Council.
No. What community is it?
Northridge.
No, the one that just happened.
Highlands.
Highlands, thank you, sorry. It's the Highlands community, which is the Miramonte area. They're the ones that just became the first fire-wise community.
Back to me. So I will start with the revenues. I'm going to go over on a high level over this, and then when it comes to our reductions, the chief will go line by line at the end of this. Just to let you know, I used the fiscal year 22 actuals, the fiscal year 23 proposed, and then the assumptions going forward on 24 and 25 that the revenues and expenditures that we propose do get enacted. So those are the numbers that you'll see. So starting with our revenues and service charges, this represents the Airport Enterprise Fund and our fire inspections, so our charges for service. The Enterprise Fund pays for Station 8, as the chief mentioned earlier. In this, we do have a small increase in revenue of $112,000 anticipated for fiscal year 24 and 25. The high-risk mandated inspections, high-risk residents? Apartments. Used to be every other year, now they will be every year. So that is where you see an increase in revenue. Our mutual aid is the next line. As you can see, it's very hard to predict what that's going to be on that cost recovery. And so we have set it up to 1.5 million coming up in 24 and 25. We will revisit around the mid-year time if we find that that number needs to be adjusted either direction. Our other line represents revenue that we receive from AMR. We use this to buy, to replenish BLS supplies. And there will be a small increase in that, just a few $1,000s each year. They have implemented a 5% CPI increase as of February of this year. This also includes our Wildland Assessment District funds and small things that we can't necessarily predict, such as restitution payments. Our internal charges, this was just in fiscal year 22. This was a transfer to fleet for working towards a lease purchase plan. Use of money and property represents a technology fund. The taxes are the half-cent sales. And we had a one-time revenue in fiscal year 22 that we don't anticipate again. Moving on to our expenditures, again, this does show our proposed and requested changes. So starting with salaries and benefits, those are our permanent and hourly salaries, overtimes, FLSA, leave cash outs, vacation buybacks. Benefits includes insurance, retirement, UAL, and medical. Dropping down to allocated costs, again, these are items that I don't necessarily have much control over. These are the fixed costs for other departments. When we come down to supplies and services, this is where you do see some fluctuation. What this is used for, and let me back up, this is where we have some choice in the matter, where we had shown the picture of everyone dressed in the different PPE for their different assignments, as well as the apparatus with all of its equipment. That's what these funds normally pay for. And a large-scale operation took place before I arrived, where the staff looked at everything it takes to run the fire department, each piece of equipment, not vehicles, but looking at everything from radios to SCBAs to goggles and gloves, and how long those life terms are for those things, how frequently they need to replace them. And they came up, and also maintenance. We can make the life of these things last longer if we do routine maintenance and repairs. So looking at all the contracts and things that went into that, and anything that would qualify for Measure C funding was identified. Reducing the services and supplies by $162,000 in fiscal year '24 and '25, with the anticipation that it would be funded through Measure C. As we continue, thank you, special projects. This is wildland mitigation and academy, ready, set, go. And as you can see, we will be requesting in fiscal year '24 to have the $300,000 that was placed there for an academy to be moved to fiscal year '25 so that we can have one full-length academy. This year we did lateral academy because we had less funding, and so it was only 4 weeks, and it was difficult to, we got some great recruits, but it is challenging to bring people over from other agencies. Transfers represent our lease payment for vehicles. Then we come down to capital equipment and projects. This is where you see the $370,000 for the Measure C. In fiscal year '23, there was computer and non-building improvements, but in fiscal year '24, this is where we have an emergency vehicle electronic infrastructure upgrades, which is what it's going to take for us to get the apparatus ready to go for the regional dispatch. We do need some upgrades in our infrastructure. And the equipment replacement. In fiscal year '25, it's just the equipment replacement schedule. Oh, sorry, that was the non-capital. I jumped ahead. And debt service is where finance is held what we were and were not able to meet as far as our obligations for the cuts. We will be revisiting the fiscal year '25, as the chief will bring up in a moment. And the $51,000 does not reflect the additional revenue that we were able to bring. So this is just the expenses, not the additional revenue. Now I'd request that Natalia come up for a moment.
Honorable Mayor, council members, members of the public, we just wanted to speak to a few additional potential issues with the fire budget, with everything that's going on. As Ms. Van Atta and Chief Mills both pointed out, the mutual aid is a little bit unpredictable because it's just due to the nature of our new fire regimes and climate change. So we did bump up that, our habit was to budget for about $1 million in mutual aid and also about $1 million in overtime each year, and then come and make the request for the changes as we went along and adjust. So we did bump that up just a little bit, given that the fire seasons have been much worse for our predicted mutual aid revenue. We also wanted to be transparent about the possibility of having much more overtime. That's partly due to mutual aid, partly due to having need for constant staffing, both of which have already been spoken to, and also could potentially be much lower if we have less fire activity, and also if we are able to hire out all of those vacancies and fill in the upcoming retirement spaces. So that number could potentially go down, but there is an amount that may be asked for as the year moves on. Also, there is a potential increase to equipment replacement. Originally, we had allocated a portion of Measure C funding to cover those breathing apparatuses and other pieces of equipment that must be replaced on a regular schedule for the safety of our staff and also for our community. So that amount was not fully expended, so that may get reallocated should they have a further need for equipment. The plan is to fund it out of Measure C. However, should the Measure C funding get allocated towards something else, there is a potential for an additional ask on the fire equipment. There's also an additional in 2025 decrease to supplies and services because of a discontinuation of either the service or other type of elimination there. So that was what we wanted to just kind of alert you guys to and let the public know for the sake of transparency.
Thank you. So just to recap what I've reviewed, looking at our overtime, we are hoping to conduct a deeper analysis of that and work with finance so that we can do a better job of predicting and budgeting for that. Our mutual aid, we're going to review the tracking method of that and how we project that in the future. Right now, we're definitely just using a placeholder and then revisiting, which, not that I mind visiting you guys, but I'd like to have it as accurate as possible. Looking at fiscal year '23, we were allocated quite a bit of money, $300,000 for wildland, or for vegetation management. Due to a variety of factors, including getting contracts, wildland season, nesting season, we have not been able to use all of that funding. We would like to roll it over to 2024 and partner it with the $525,000 conservancy grant that we have to really maximize the impact that can have. Exciting news, Fire Station 3 came in under budget, and so we do have some funding left in a maintenance project account in the amount of $69,000. We would request that we roll that over to fiscal year '24 and with council's permission, be able to allocate that towards a security fence at Fire Station 1. Currently, the station is not secure. The gate is opened in the evening, and that's straight off of Chapala. And we've had vehicles broken into, plus it allows access to the fire station. And then last but not least, rolling over $300,000 that is currently shown in your allocated or suggested 2024 budget for an academy. We'd like to move that to 2025, again, so that we can have a full-length academy.
Okay, and now we move on to our recommendation for budget reductions. We spent a great deal of time on this. It doesn't go unnoticed by me that my staff put a lot of time and energy into trying to decide how to take a bite out of multiple apples to lessen the pain a bit. But listening to Chief Gordon's introductory comments about budget reduction really kind of rings true with us too. So we were asked to make the budget reductions of 2% and 3%. So what we're recommending to move forward for fiscal year '24 is the permanent elimination of an Inspector 2 position. This position was held open for the last 2 years during COVID, and we're going to propose to permanently eliminate that position. We also held open a warehouse specialist position, and we're wanting to eliminate that position. What we're doing is we're having our firefighters and support staff handle equipment ordering, all that kind of stuff in lieu of that position. One of the things that actually I began working on as soon as I became fire chief was to find a sustainable replacement program for all of our equipment. The example that I've used is that when I was the training or EMS chief, I had to find a grant for defibrillators. And so one of the things I wanted to do was to create a sustainable replacement program for all of our equipment that's based on recommended service life. For example, our turnouts have a 10-year life. And they're upwards of $3,000 for a pair of turnouts. So rather than go look for a grant or come back to you asking for money, what we've done is we've created a fund that puts all of our equipment on a replacement schedule. Like I said, everything from turnouts to our air compressor that fills our breathing apparatus, to our breathing apparatus, to all of our fire hose, jaws of life, all of our medical equipment, including oxygen delivery equipment, et cetera. So we worked with the city and created a fund that's been put into Measure C. And so what we're doing is shifting $162,000 that had been our equipment replacement fund in the general fund fire department budget. We're shifting that back to the city, and then we will get all of our equipment through Measure C. We made a small decrease in the operations training budget. We have asked to cancel all of the custodial work at the administrative office building. Our folks we've come up with a plan to do our own cleaning on a daily and weekly basis. So that was $29,000. We'll decrease our educational supplies a bit, and then stopping the use of take-home vehicles for our fire prevention staff. We only have one person on call at a time. However, when we do have anything more than just a routine fire, we are often calling back 2 or 3 fire inspectors. They also work weird hours, but we have come up with a plan to stop the use of their take-home vehicles, and so they'll store their vehicles at various fire stations and then drive their own personal vehicle. And then we've elected to reduce our fleet by 1. Our emergency manager normally has a vehicle assigned to her, and so what we've done is we've turned that into a pool vehicle, which allows us to return 1 of our vehicles to fleet. So that is about $520,000. We've roughly met the request for FY24. So for FY25, this is where it got a little bit difficult for us. We do have a $96,000 decrease that we can find when we move to regional dispatch. Our city's CAD, our police-based computer dispatch system, will not have to have the fire component of it anymore. And so that'll result in a $96,000 savings to the city when we move to regional fire dispatch, because all of the CAD or computer-aided dispatch will be funded by the regional dispatch. But the end result is we did not meet our fiscal 25-year targets. The cuts that were proposed were deemed to be too severe and be a significant service level impact to the community. We identified 2 key leadership positions that were the best of the worst option. So, however, we elected not to move those positions forward. However, we stand to talk with the city and meet with administration and finance, either mid-year or FY25, to see if we can get a better handle on any additional revenues that came into the department, especially with the fee study, and then to look at the potential for eliminating positions. These will be positions. We don't, as Ms. Van Addis said, we don't have much more that we can cut. Now we are at positions. And so I'll be working to figure out the best option for us moving forward. But at this time, we're not making a recommendation for FY25, but we pledge to come back and work with the city to figure out how best to move forward on that. Okay, and back to Chief Fetterman. He'll talk about CORE a little bit, and we're almost done.
Thank you. So we're going to talk about our core initiatives, pivoting off of the previous P3s. And our first one under Thriving Workforce, our goal is looking for opportunities for personal growth and professional development, as well as being diligent in creating that healthy and safe and productive culture for our department. And not just in our performance measures, not just in the department's walls, but externally with SEMS, or Standardized Emergency Management Training, for our new employee orientation for anybody that would be called upon to help in the EOC. Additionally, through the EOC is to provide quarterly training to staff and our volunteers that may serve in that capacity. And utilizing our health program, physical exams annually for our fire personnel. Our goal is to have 75% participation in that process. And it is a fantastic program for our fire personnel to be very proactive to find preventative concerns. And additionally, seek that 75% of our folks will go for external professional development and training. Under innovation, our goal is for opportunities, the use of technology, professional and timely delivery of service to our entire community. Within public education, we're hopeful to develop an online request form where community members can submit and have a clear portal to reach into our public outreach and education programs, and we're able to get back to them in an efficient and timely manner. Implement the use of Teams in our EOC. We did experience a rough run of that during the storms that our emergency manager was able to put together, and we'd like to expand upon that. We would also like to, in support of the community's or the city's CRM program, make sure that the fire department is responsive within 3 days to community members that reach out, increasing our public education and outreach with not just the emergency side, but the non-emergency side, more preventable and educational opportunities to over 2,000 social media posts, as well as a successful integration of the regional dispatch that the chief spoke about. From organizational optimization, making sure that we as a fire department are sustainable and our community is resilient, reaching 1,000 community members through the delivery of our community disaster education program to include our fire safety house for all third graders in our community. Like Chief DiGiulio mentioned, completing 14 miles of vegetation road clearance within the WFSAT, and ensure our emergency incident response times are within national standard that will be highlighted in our standard of cover study, and make sure from the fire prevention standpoint that we are inspecting at least 90% of our high-risk residential facilities throughout our community.
And just to recap on the capital programs, this includes for fiscal year 24 and 25, the Measure C Equipment Replacement Fund, and in fiscal year 24, the infrastructure upgrades so that we can move to regional dispatch.
All right, very good. Do we have questions from the council? Ms. Snedden?
Thank you, Mayor Rouse. I have comments later, but the one question I have is with super bloom of vegetation and everywhere in the rain, does that adjust the priorities of vegetation management units, or do they all sort of bloom proportionately in the same way, or what's going to happen?
So I'll begin to answer that question, and I'll bring Chief DiGiulio up. I'm not sure if anyone had the opportunity, but I attended a press conference yesterday with CAL FIRE. They were actually at San Ynez Airport. It's Wildfire Preparedness Month, and so we had CAL FIRE from all over the state and departments from all over the state. And the reporters asked, what's this wildland season going to be like? And Chief Joe Tyler, who runs CAL FIRE, Chief Mark Hartwig, that runs Santa Barbara County Fire, kind of collectively went, we don't know. So we have a massive amount of light fuels, grasses. We have 6 to 8 foot tall mustard. We have seasonal grasses that are 4 and 5 feet high that even right now are beginning to cure. However, our heavier fuels, our brush and trees, their live moisture content is actually very high right now, sitting at about 125% of normal. So that would stand to reason in my mind that as the grasses begin to cure, we're going to have grass fires. The question is what's the fuel moisture going to be like when it gets into the heavier fuels? I think May, that we're in right now, or June or July, could be a little quieter, but winds, weather, heat, into the, when we're talking September, October, it's really not going to matter much that we got so much rain. So, that goes along with us trying to predict how much revenue we need to put in for mutual aid, because we don't know. We don't know. This was really the final year of our drought, it looks like. We would have expected a massive deployment of resources this last summer that actually didn't happen. So $600,000 versus $2.3 million in billed mutual aid overtime for the previous season. So the short answer is we're not quite sure, but all it takes is a few weeks of heat, and when we get the winds of fall, it will be right back where we were before. But I'll let you talk about the VMUs.
Sure. Councilmember Sten, thanks for the question. Good question. $1 million question, no pun intended, but that's really what we've been asked a lot when we're walking on the street these days. As far as the vegetation management units and the programs within the CWPP, that document and the work that Dudek did was over a big stretch of time and took in many different factors. So not just an annual growth rate, but topography, wind conditions, right, evacuation routes, density of housing. So it was a big conglomerate. So it's not going to change the priority level as far as where we're concerning our efforts, but I will say it should change the priority level of homeowners. It's a big growing year. Take advantage of our chipping program that we do in the Wolfsat area. Take advantage of defensible space inspections we can conduct for free. It's a year for the homeowners to really be engaged because now they're seeing that vegetation, and not just their house, but in the neighborhood as well. So it's a good year for that, but as far as the priorities, it's not going to change.
Okay, so it's sort of foreseen. They could see trends over time and could kind of tell, is how I'm interpreting
Correct,
that. Yeah.
and a big grow season would only be one part of the overall pie that they took into consideration to come up with the priority level.
And then I'm supportive of the rollover, well, all the rollovers, but why couldn't we spend the 300,000 for suppression? And will we be able to spend it this year?
Yeah, good question. We really we're having a hard time finding contractors that were able to help us do that work. Hence our grant idea and acceptance of our own fuels crew, that now we don't have to rely on anybody else. We can go out and do that work ourselves. So we have a very small window on a calendar year when we can do that work as well. So we were bumping up against bird nesting season, biological barriers, and then trying to coordinate with a contractor when they were available. We just couldn't pull it all off in time, but that's why we're asking to roll some of those funds over with the grant money to be able to extend some of that hand crew vegetation management time.
And we'll be able to use it?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. And then to what degree do you think the CWPP helps in being able to secure those funds through grants?
It helps immensely. Mostly because a lot of the folks offering the grants want to see the latest and greatest implementations you're doing as a community, both from a fire department side and within the community partnership as well. And that document hits all those boxes. So to even, add some more oomph to it, when we grab other departments like parks that join with us, and we show that to a grant committee, now our scope of being able to write grants expands with our collaboration, right? We don't have to go just for fire grants. We can do Parks and Rec grants as well and partner with everybody to get all our goals accomplished at once.
Yeah, phenomenal, thank you. And then I always get the question, and you can, how does a group become a FireWise community? So that's really exciting that we now have one. And I know there's a meeting this week coming up for a community, and you can join them on Zoom also. But if you could tell us, what is the process?
Sure. I think step one is to give us a call, and we can help you and guide you into that process. As I've mentioned before, it's a collaboration. We don't own the program. The actual neighborhood owns the program. And like I've said before, I liken it to the Neighborhood Watch program. It's really a grassroots community involvement. Now, Mike Lopez from our Wildland Division spent a lot of time with the Highlands community to get their paperwork processed correctly, make sure that they had all the things they needed dialed in before they put their application in. But it was exciting for us to actually see some of those efforts come to fruition. I know the Northridge neighborhood is very interested. There's some other pockets within the city that's also starting to gain some momentum, so it's starting to work, and the effort's starting to go out there in the community. And you can get a reduction in your fire insurance. You can obtain grants and funding on your own to do projects in your neighborhood. So it's a very worthwhile community-based effort that we're happy to help neighborhoods try to accomplish.
Thank you, and congratulations to the Highlands community. And then this is a question, I'm not sure who can answer it, and maybe it can't be answered at this moment, but can we have a reminder of what was our revenue loss to the city during the Thomas Fire. I just want to make the point that when there are fires in the area, that we have major losses to revenue, and just sort of a ballpark dollar amount on that. And I realize this is a surprise question, I just coming up to it now, so if we don't have the number.
Yes, Councilmember Senate, I do have some information on the loss to the city, revenue loss due to the Thomas Fire. We lost approximately $1 million of sales tax and transient occupancy tax. There was about $250,000 lost to downtown parking revenues. And then there was some smaller losses to the waterfront with their sort of activity, and the golf course, and then recreation programs as well. In total, the city lost approximately $1.5 million.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, Mayor Rouse, Councilmember Sneddon, I just also want to point out that that was largely due to the debris flow, which fortunately is less frequent, but certainly fires have even more decimating effect on the personal property of our residents when they burn in our city.
I just want to make sure I understand. My understanding was that the loss of revenue was the sustained Thomas Fire. It was the smoke in the air, people couldn't shop, it was Christmas, no one came, we alleviated the parking costs, there were all kinds of costs.
All of that, yes, including the debris flow, right?
In the city?
Because of not being able to get here because of the freeway being closed, and because of the impacts to Coast Village Road and the impacts to the parking garages and all of that. So it was all of those things, but it does highlight the effects of wildfire.
I just want to be sure I understand that revenue was falling off. The Thomas Fire was a sustained event that could be measured, and the debris flow was instantaneous event that continued to impact, but the budget impacts when we have fires to the tourist base is substantial. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Friedman.
Thank you. Just a couple questions. Thank you, Chief. Just so I understand, when we get mutual aid reimbursements for the overtime costs, that's the overtime that we have here in our stations that are being reimbursed for being fully staffing, or is that overtime for those firefighters that we're sending away?
Mayor Rouse, Councilmember Friedman, it's both. So what we bill for is what's called portal to portal. That means from the minute the crew leaves to the minute they come back, we actually bill at time and a half. The reason for that is if the employee is scheduled to be off that day, even though they're assigned on the fire, they make overtime. However, what's also important is when it's their scheduled duty day and they're out, they're on a regular day of work, but we have to backfill their position at home on overtime. So our total billing is for the actual positions that go out on a 24/7 overtime, plus an administrative fee of 17.9%, which is industry standard. And then we also bill for the apparatus, the wear and tear on the apparatus, et cetera, because when they come back, they have to go through preventative maintenance. They may need new tires, new this, new that. So the fires basically have to make every community whole. Not that our city is particularly big, but if you think about some of the smaller jurisdictions that also participate in mutual aid, they can't afford to send crews out and not recoup 100% of what they've spent. So it's not designed to cost any agency anything. It does have an internal cost to us in a sense that there's a fine line between having too many people out of town, which then causes problems with backfilling, having to force hire or mandate people. A number of years ago, we would send a crew out for 14 days and people would work the entire 14 days back in the city because they basically couldn't get off work. So we have a balance of how many people we have and how many people we also send out.
Thanks for the clarification. I just wanted to be sure that we're getting the backfill here in the stations.
Yes.
Just a couple more questions. So the state budget is projected to be getting closer, from everything I'm hearing, to $50 billion this year, and so they're looking for cuts, obviously. And we mentioned that we're looking for a lot of grants. And has there been any indication on whether some of the grant funding programs that we're going to be relying on or looking to would be cut as part of the budget this year and or next year?
Ms. Bjork may have more, but I can tell you that from a fire department perspective, Chief Tyler, the chief of Cal OES yesterday, stated that the grant money is still available. They are awarding grants. They are also doing something that's a little bit different than they've done in the past. They are approving what's called pre-positioning, which means that they are actually putting fire crews in areas of the state that they think they're going to have a problem. And I will give you an example of that actually the first time the state ever approved a pre-positioning of fire apparatus was the night of the holiday fire. We had 5 extra CAL FIRE engines at the intersection of Calle Real and Fairview Avenue when that fire broke out. So they have pledged up to $25 million annually to pre-position fire apparatus. I know myself, a couple of years ago, I spent the weekend on the Gaviota Coast for a pre-position. But back to just strictly grants, we have seen no indication that CAL FIRE is going to be discontinuing or stopping any awarding of grants.
Great, thank you. That's encouraging news, and I'm sure for this year it's encouraging, but we'll be watching that for the next fiscal year based on what happens to the stock market this year and where they wind up for fiscal year 25. That's what drives it, since a lot of their revenue, or majority of it, comes from capital gains. The last question I have, if you could just pull up slide, I think it's 21. Just wanted to I think it's 21, or slide 19, sorry. Slide 19. So just going back to the rollover, if I recall, that was the council had advocated for that last year, and now we're rolling it over. And from what I understood is that we're going to have grants, and we're going to use this to have our own in-house crew. So we won't run into the situation we had this past year where we can be more flexible on a shorter notice. But does that mean that this $300,000 that was one time last year, is there an expectation built into the budget that it's going to be a permanent $300,000 each year? Because if this is a program we want to keep with our own crew, we're going to have to fund it. So I just trying to understand if this is rolling over one time, or if it's rolling over one time plus it's just going to be a permanent addition.
Mayor Rouse, Councilmember Friedman, the $300,000 actually was from 2 fiscal years. We received, I believe it was $100,000 first and then $200,000. One disclaimer I want to make is that we have used some of the funds. We just put a $300,000 cap on it because we weren't sure where we were going to be, but some of the funds have been exhausted. Back to your question, there was no expectation that this was going to be an ongoing fund. These were one-time injects into the budget. One thing I do want to say, and back to Councilmember Sneddon's, Chief DiGiulio alluded to it, what our hope is that we can use our fuels crew to do a portion of the work and then be able to contract for a portion of it. Let me just hypothetically say that we bring the fuels crew through a neighborhood, they're able to cut, but they don't have the time to chip. Perhaps then we can use that revenue, that money through vegetation management to bring a chipping crew in that may be able to, hey, we've got 2 hours every afternoon for the next week, we can do all your chipping. So kind of use it as a force multiplier. We'd like to use the 525 for boots on the ground, actually doing vegetation management, and then backfill with either private contractors or supplementing the work.
Okay. So this will get us there. And being that this is kind of the first time we're doing this, we're going to have lessons learned, obviously, in the year. So then we'll have a better understanding of the cost. But I would expect if this works, then this might actually turn into something that would be more permanent funding because we want to keep the program going.
Possibly, but also this, the Coastal Conservancy grant is also a 2-year grant. So we've got 2 years that we can tap into this and hire these hourly folks to hopefully get some good work done for us.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
Mr. Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Ryan, could I invite you back up? Sorry. So we've talked about this, I know, but there are probably some people watching too. So other than the success of the certifications of the Highlands Group, you would your department would also be available too, just let's just use the example below, below KEYT where the Loma fire was. So that's, I don't know, there might be 4 properties there left to right where they basically own that whole hillside, right? And so if there are private parties like that that are just looking for help too on how to, those 4 groups self-assess themselves on a continuing basis to get goats or sheep up there, whatever that would look like, the department can help work through that process too. It does, I realized like the better standard is the certification, and that has other benefits too, but you're also available just to help on, I would just characterize that as spot situations too, right?
Yeah, Councilmember Jordan, that's correct. I think the pendulum, the descriptions I'm laying out, the pendulum is swinging. So we have a Firewise community,
Yep.
and then we have, walk around your house as a homeowner. Anywhere in that pendulum, we are able to help a single homeowner or a cul-de-sac or a group of homes. We're more than happy to have our folks come out there and go, hey, collaboratively, this is what you 4 homeowners can do. Or individually, this would work great. And give them educate them a little bit on basic fire behavior. Hey, your slope faces to the south. You're at a greater risk. You might want to clear some more vegetation. This is the stuff that you should clear out now. This is the stuff that can wait a little while.
And if they want to go as far as creating a district, you could help with that too, right? Or how big a space or how many private homeowners does that have to be?
That's a good question. I don't know if there's a minimum.
Okay.
To tell you the truth, I'd have to do some homework on that to be deemed a Firewise community.
We'll chat because we're going to chat.
Let's
So
chat about that.
that'd be one of my questions.
And we have lots of one-lane roads that may only have 5 or 6 residents, but
Yep.
it poses a very large threat.
And then, I'm sure I've asked this before, but I've forgotten the answer. So use Highlands as an example. So they're sitting still above, what is it, Rio Hondo Park?
Mm-hmm.
And Vic Trace Reservoir.
Mhm.
I've never been to either one of those in dead dry season, but I imagine they look pretty unpleasant.
Yeah.
So when they're doing the work and they're still uphill from private property, what's the answer for that rather than just a Firewise community that takes care of its footprint to join in and help, or is there an avenue to join in and self-assess to help with public property, also keep down the adjacent risk?
Sure, and I think that's where it's a two-way collaborative effort by both the public and private entities. So we're going out and conducting some vegetation management in Honda Valley, right? In collaboration with Miramonte and the Highlands becoming a Firewise community, now we've expanded that area immensely, both on a private and public side of a parcel line to work together to help fire
So
mitigation.
nuts and bolts of my question really means if we can't afford to do enough, but the private property owners can and are willing to contribute to the public property maintenance, like if we're doing it once every 3 years and crossing our fingers in the 2 off years, is there a mechanism for self-assessment that also allows the private sector to contribute to adjacent public sector lands? Because nobody is in a vacuum here, right, as you know, right? It's
Right.
you're all subject to whatever the guy between you and the wind is doing too,
Yes.
right?
Yes. I have not been privy to any private groups that are willing to give money to the public sector to conduct vegetation management programs.
All right. Thank you for that. And then, Chief, when you're talking about, you're going to come back, I know we're going to hear from you on this, Ms. Roll, fiscal year 25, but just so you're going to, I just want to start thinking about what you're going to want to talk about, and I would assume you're going to talk about closing a station, reducing crews at the station from 3 to 2, having, you heard the police discussion, when there's a call and there's only 2 at one station and 2 at the other, you have both stations come, so you actually get a full crew there, and then you don't have coverage at another station. It becomes this whack-a-mole kind of thing. I mean, are those the choices we're eventually going to?
Mayor Rouse, Councilmember Jordan, I surely hope not. Let me address each one. First of all, the standards of cover study that we did that's ongoing, that's still in review, they have looked at our coverage, and we are doing well with 8 fire stations. They are not going to be recommending closing a fire station. One of the problems with the city of Santa Barbara, I had a captain back when I started used to say, you can't get there from here. And what he meant by that was, geographically, this is a really difficult city to move around in. You look at a map, you look at the proximity between Station 7 and Station 3, and you go, oh man, they just look like they're a couple blocks away. Yeah, but it takes forever to get in between those areas. So really, response times are absolutely key. I will say this, that with regional dispatch, once we have data and we're able to look at the calls for service, especially up in the foothill area with Montecito Fire, with the county fire department station at Mission Canyon, with our Station 7, our Station 4, we may be able to find some efficiencies in there. However, the next part is I want to address the 3 to 2 person engine company. That is.
You and I have talked
Yeah,
about this
we've
before,
talked
and I know
about
that's
that.
a line in the sand.
It's a
for you.
line in the sand.
Yeah.
It really is. It would be like me telling you I'd be okay going out with 5 people on a football team when the other team has 11. It's not going to go well. The county is doing it, and so has Montecito with both of their engines. They have moved to 4-person engine companies, not 3. 3 is the absolute bare bones minimum. Your bigger fire departments, LA, San Diego, San Francisco, run 4 on their engine companies. We can get by with 3, but going down to 2-person is not something anybody in the fire service could support. It's 3 or it's 0. You're out of service. You just cannot work safely, efficiently, or effectively with less than 3 people.
Okay.
But they are going to be hard discussions if we get to that.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you both very much.
All right, very good. Well, I love the fire dynamic. It was really a wet winter. It's going to be a horrible fire season. It's been really dry. It's going to be a horrible fire season. Seems like I have this every year. But I did have a question. And going back to what Councilmember Jordan was just talking about, because when you guys introduced the new comm system that we have that we're ready to launch here, that was part of the thing, was being able to have that kind of coverage with the GIS identification where everybody is at any given time. I think the Loma Fire was a great demonstration of why we needed that system. So I'm kind of hoping that comes to fruition where we have this, because you guys have always cooperated really well with your fellow agencies, so I think that's important. Speaking of that little borderline area, Station 7, you have a line item on here for $9 million for capital. Is Station 7 still partially a federal property as well, or that property up there, that station? Or is that one of those questions you really don't want to talk about right now?
I'm happy to talk about it, Mayor Rouse. So Fire Station 7, which is located at 2411 Stanwood Drive at the corner of Mission Ridge and Stanwood, has been there since the 1960s. It is very antiquated. It's old. It needs to be a new fire station. However, in cooperation with facilities this last year, we actually put some work into the fire station. We redid the kitchen, we redid some infrastructure, made it more livable, made it more safe for the firefighters, but the bottom line is there's actually 2 fault lines that run through the property. So we are not going to be able to rebuild on that property. However, since we did put some work into it, we did push out the $9 million for a new fire station. We also were waiting for the results of the standards of cover study. But you bring up a very good point, and that is the efficiency of a regional dispatch center. I think the standards of cover study says really take a look at the data that comes out of the regional dispatch center to really decide if all of your fire stations are in the correct location based on the closest available resource. And like I said, when I did my presentation to you, when you've got a county fire station sitting in Mission Canyon that's closer to the Upper East Side of Santa Barbara, perhaps we could move a fire station to a different location. So it's more of a long-term look, but what we really have to have is once regional dispatch lights are on, we're really going to need at least a year of data to take a look at how those apparatus are being assimilated into the system and how they are being moved around our communities.
No, I remember that part of it, but that, the Forest Service part of
Oh.
that property, is that, I
Thank
mean,
you.
are they,
So-
are they going to continue service from there, or is that, or do we know?
So that, when this was a little bit before my time, but that was a temporary location for the Forest Service. And I believe, I want to say it was 2005, that they came in and brought the trailer in, and they have been there ever since.
Yeah.
So it's actually one of the things that I asked the consultant to look at with the standards of cover study is they've been basically here occupying that position at our station for a long time, number one. And number two, if we're going to have to move, they're likely going to have to move too, because they are a fire
That's
station
kind of
also.
where I was going, if there was some kind of a cooperative funding mechanism on a new venue where we could abandon that one because of earthquake issues.
Mayor Rouse, that actually was part of the discussions a couple of years ago, was having the federal government partner with us to build a co-located fire station. So I think that absolutely could be in the future.
Great.
And I think it's important because it would be really nice to have all of those personnel under one roof.
Thank you, Chief. Are there further comments or questions from council? Sure. Light them up.
Thank you. Did we have any public comment? Or?
Do we have public comment? No. They don't have online today. Would you like to make a public comment?
All right, well, I'm ready. I'll make a comment.
I'll let Ms. Sneddon go first.
Thank you. So I'll just reiterate again that I do not support cuts to public safety, fire included. We need working trucks, we need the PPE, we need working equipment. A lot of it is outdated and needs to be updated. On slide 21, and, I'll say again, I appreciate you bringing this forward, but except for the shifting the equipment replacement schedule to Measure C, which is a great idea, have Measure C paying for that equipment, all the rest of these, to me, are sort of like, no way. And the warehouse specialist, to have firefighters working on bringing things from the warehouse, using their time that way, or dealing with the receipts. I just don't see that as a best use of time or talent in that particular regard. So aside from the shifting equipment to Measure C, I would say no thank you to those. It's a little bit too bad that so much discussion has to be on the cuts, because you have indeed had many significant accomplishments this year, and building on accomplishment over accomplishment, and starting with that CWPP and then what that's been able to do to leverage towards grant funding. And, we've had a lot of cries from hillside neighbors saying, how can we get more vegetation management clearance? How can we do more? And then how you've been able to leverage those funds and put that in time. And Fire Marshal DiGiulio, I just think that the expertise that you've brought in this particular area really shows, and in the planning in that, and also looking forward to getting more Fire Rise communities. I think now that there's one in place, that we can see how to do that, and it's to our benefit. I also appreciate the emphasis, again, on the homegrown talent. We're seeing that in you, Chief Nails, that your expertise and sort of local expertise. And you said it, and it's been said before, that this is just not like other communities in terms of the wind canals and how the vegetation units grow and how fires are fought here in terms of just the hillside and the varied topography there. Appreciating the participation in mutual aid, and I'm glad for the question and the answer that it sort of pays for itself, and then we also benefit from that. But I am a little bit just always concerned that if we have year-round fire seasons, which thankfully we didn't this year, but the overextension of our firefighters and just sort of ever having downtime is a little bit of a concern to keep an eye on. the sheep grazing, that was great to see, that expanding and thinking outside of the box in that way and being able to leverage those grants. I do support all of the rollover department requests that were made. I think those are all a good idea. They were hard fought to get, and I think hold on to them and use them, and really, especially this year when there's so much extra vegetation bloom. I just want to emphasize that even if we didn't believe in the need in staying fully staffed and fully equipped to be able to fight fires just for safety reasons, our revenue plummets when our city's on fire or when neighboring areas are on fire. And that's a pretty mercenary way to look at it. But having clear skies and having no fire is a revenue generator. And when we have fire season, it's when it's hot and it's dry. And that's also our tourist season, when it's hot and it's dry. I can just justify on many levels that these funds should be kept whole on public safety in both departments. Those are my comments.
Mr. Jordan? Not you? Okay, catch you on the wrong thing. And Ms. Gutierrez? I don't know, you said you were on. Just, it's my God, right here. Go ahead, Ms. Gutierrez.
I want to thank Chief for this presentation. I agree with Ms. Sneddon about cutting the service for the fire department. I don't think the public understands how much you guys work with different departments. I've been personally witness, unfortunately, not just once, but a couple of times that officers didn't come to a call for emergencies at my home, and it was the fire department that got there first. It was a fireman who actually told my dad, you need to go to the ER like now because you can have a concussion. It wasn't the police department. And it was because they're short-staffed. And I don't think a lot of the public understands that you guys not only go and when there's a call for a fire, but you guys attend so many different calls. And sometimes we see you first, then law enforcement because of they're not fully staffed. It really hurts me when we're going to cut positions or even talking about closing fire station and training. That it's crucial. We've been on national news about some of our, the fires we've had. I just really just want to thank your whole department and the work you do. And, and you guys also play a huge role when there's openings of new businesses or houses where that fire inspector has to go. There's a lot of things that you guys are involved in the structure and the safety of this city. So I just wanted to say thank you.
Mr. Friedman.
All right. First, thank you to Chief and your staff for the presentation. I want to welcome Ms. Van Atta. Thank you. Good job on your first time in front of council. It's always a little nerve-wracking when you're in front of the seven of us, but good job and welcome to the team. I support public safety as well, and we need to ensure that we are meeting the needs of our community. All I'm going to say is that, just like I did with the police, is I'm going to be looking at the whole budget, because if we, as a council, and you can make a case for what my colleagues are saying, that we need to fully fund public safety and not cut it, but without the additional revenue that's coming in, any additional revenue that comes in, those cuts are going to have to be made from somewhere. So I'm going to ask Ms. Bjork, as you look at what these full costs would be for public safety, if you could come back with specific additional cuts from the other departments, because everything has to be on the table for us to get to where I'm hearing my colleagues want to go and for public safety, so that, one, we can make that decision, but it's also important for the public to understand that there are other departments that we haven't heard from today that they value, parks, libraries in particular, that are heavily general fund as well, human services, all that. We have to be able to say if we're going to fully fund public safety, where that's going to come from, and have that discussion. And so I would just hope my colleagues would look at that and say, where's it going to come from? So, but we'll be looking at the whole budget, but I'm just going to ask for more specific, deeper cuts from other departments if we're going to fund it. Thank you. Look at deeper funds. I'm not supportive of those. I just want to know that information is. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Well, yeah, any cut in public safety, I mean, public safety is our number one responsibility. Mr. Freeman's right, though. It's, I mean, they're the two biggest parts of the budget we do have, and everybody's had to chip in and look at it. From council, we also have to look at where our revenues come from and make decisions that are sober on all these things. This is a marathon, not a sprint for budget season. So we got a lot of these discussion coming up. So thank you for your presentation. Appreciate that. And we'll see the rest of you guys at the next session, which is what, tomorrow? Friday? Yeah. Yeah, happy hour. Thank you very much. We're adjourned.